Senior year is supposed to mean something, right? For me, it didn't mean dick all. Just another day on my calendar. I got a job at a family restaurant that we all grew up eating at. Burgers, breakfast all day. You know the spot because your hometown, I'm sure, has one too. I ended up working full time. My parents didn't push for anything more than that. They figured I'd move on eventually, and I think I honestly figured the same. Most of the days would look the same. Sleep, video games, work, repeat. I wasn't miserable doing this, I just didn't feel much of anything. I told myself it's temporary. Eventually I will do more. The weed came with the job. Almost everybody there smoked. Servers, cooks, bussers, people I'd grown up with, a few years older than me. On breaks, we'd slip behind the building near the dumpsters, where the smell pretty much covered everything. Somebody would keep watch and somebody would light up. It was my portal into substance use, and it was some of the best fun of my life. The first time I hesitated, my hands shook a little when I took the pipe. Jenny laughed at me, told me to relax, so I did. After that, work just wasn't easier. It was a blast. Time flew by. Nothing could get under my skin. I started looking forward to the dumpster breaks more than the end of my shift. One of the cooks sold weed on the side. Everybody knew. It's where most of us got our supply from. You wanted an eighth or a quarter, just asked him and brought cash. And for a while, that's exactly how it stayed. Nice and easy and familiar. My dudes. That's the part that I didn't get into yet. How thin that sense of safety really was, and how fast it can actually disappear. The cook's name was Ryan. He had never burned anybody. Same price as same deal. You handed him cash during a lull, he handed you a bag later. No more stories, no bullshit. So when I asked him for weed that night and he shook his head, it threw me. I didn't re-up. I'm totally dry this week. That annoyed me. I was new to smoking but didn't want to be cut off. It felt right away, this low buzz of frustration teetering on some kind of crash out. Jenny noticed I was off and asked me what was going on. I told her. She thought for a second, then unlocked her phone. There's a guy I've used before. It's not my regular guy, but more like my brother's friend. She paused for just a beat. He cool? I asked. Yeah, just you be cool. She sent me the number, no name. I texted it near the end of my shift. No response after that. I checked my phone over and over, desperately. Finally, I get a text saying, "What you need?" I told him. Said I'd pay $60 for an eighth. Just put my cards on the table. That works, he texted back. You free now? No, when I get off work, if that's cool, I said back to him. We closed, the restaurant slowly came back together and chairs were up, floors were mopped, and it was just about time to go. Just got out, I sent to him. A minute later, I got my response. Old Quarry Road, follow it to the end, by the well. I stared at the instructions. The road was miles out of town, no lights, no houses, just dirt and trees out there. What the fuck is this? I told myself it's a safety thing, right? First time deal with a complete stranger, but whatever. So I texted back, on my way. That road narrowed on the way out of town. Pavement soon disappeared, and I listened to Hollywood Undead or some lame shit on the cruise out, smoking roaches that I'd saved up in my ashtray. My headlights didn't pick up anything on any direction. At the end of the road, there was this old well framed with some cinder blocks. I parked and killed the engine. Everything around me was dark and silent. I checked my phone. No signal, no messages. So I just waited. The stars were bright and I lost myself in them, with that faint buzz of high starting to just get behind my eyes. Then I heard an engine. No headlights, just the sound. Tires popping on gravel. It stopped somewhere off to my left. I heard doors open and close, and a handful of people then approached, unseen. And that's when it all hit me that I should not be out here. I grabbed my door handle, started to jump back in my car, and movement came out of the dark, 3 shapes sprinting right at me. Hey, I started, and somebody hit me in the nose before I could even finish my sentence. I collapsed into my car. Another grabbed me as I tried to stand up. I went down hard, dirt in my mouth. Someone then kicked my ribs and somebody else hit my back. I rolled over and took 3-4 straight shots to the face. I saw stars, tasted blood, but still, I was trying to scramble away. So what happened? They kept stomping the shit out of me. Stay down, a voice said. so I stayed down. Hands went through my pockets, my wallet, cash, keys, phone disappearing. Nobody said a word. They dragged me to my car and went through it, pumped the console, flipped the glove box, popped the trunk. I lay there staring up at some stars, counting my breath, waiting for it just to be over. Them leaving, killing me, whatever it took. Eventually, everybody walked away and the engine came back. Doors opened and closed, and they tooted back the way they came from. I didn't move for a really long time because where was I gonna go? They had my keys. If they didn't even take my car, I hadn't checked yet. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. When I finally sat up, my ribs screamed and my head was ringing. My arms and legs were shaking like I was having a seizure. My car was still there, doors open, interior completely torn apart. Wallet was gone, all my cash, around $340. My phone, my Nintendo DS, and that part straight pissed me off. I saw my situation and just kind of curled up and started crying. When I was finally done moaning, I drove home, sticking to the back roads. I didn't turn on the radio. Every set of headlights behind me was making me tense up. Was afraid they were following me. Came back to finish the job. But nobody ever cruised up on me. My parents were asleep when I got home and I didn't wake them. I cleaned the dirt off my face, rinsed my mouth and went to bed, nervous I might have a concussion. The next day at work, Emily asked what happened and I told her I got jumped and didn't get into the details. Who were they? I asked her. She hesitated before saying, I don't really know. They're friends of my brother or people he knows. I've only bought from them a couple of times. That's all she had to offer me. I thought about calling the cops and ended up deciding against it. I didn't feel like explaining why I was out there or what I was doing. There was nothing I could point to anyway, nothing legal anyway. So I just took the hit, picked up a few extra shifts and stayed quiet about it. I didn't buy from anybody new after that and just stuck to Ryan. Decided not to be so desperate to smoke. The bruises faded, but my ego was bruised for a long time after that. I thought about those assholes every day for years and years. Nothing supernatural happened out there, no mystery to solve. Just a really bad decision on my part and, of course, people who were ready to take full advantage of it. Graduation weekend always turned people loose inside my town. Parents were usually out of town like they usually were on the weekends, which meant my house ended up being the place. It wasn't anything special, but it turned into a madhouse. It was just kind of known that if my parents weren't home, there'd probably be a party. I wasn't trying to build a reputation or anything, it just kind of happened that way. And graduation night ended up being a perfect excuse. I stocked up on beer, pulled a couple of bottles from my dad's cabinet, and made sure there was weed around so nobody got bored or edgy. Word got out fast. People showed up early, then more people, then people I didn't recognize but didn't hold up or anything. The backyard filled to the point of bursting, then in the kitchen, then in the living room. Music got crazy loud. Somebody dragged furniture around to make the room to dance and slapbox and wrestle. I spent most of my night walking through the house keeping an eye on things, making sure nobody broke anything, making sure nobody was really fighting. Control gave me this little relief on those wild nights. Just because my parents were out of town didn't mean they didn't care about their property. And that's when I took notice of 3 juniors. They stood out because they kind of looked young. Not loud or annoying, just clearly not seniors. One of them was Adam Pratt. I knew him from algebra. He sat behind me and occasionally asked for help with assignments, or sometimes he would even help me. "Congrats, man," he said when he saw me, lifting up his beer. "Thanks, you guys good?" "Yeah, we're good, just cutting loose a little." The other 2 nodded. They seemed just as excited to be here. I thought about telling them in the moment they needed to head out. It crossed my mind, but Adam wasn't causing any problems and it felt petty to kick him out, at least right now. It was graduation. Everybody was celebrating. I didn't want to be that guy. And reasons I wanted them to leave were personal and pretty much superficial. I just didn't want them getting caught up if anything went sideways. So I ended up letting them stay. At the time, it was nothing, just another small decision inside a night full of chaos. Thinking back now, I know I fucked up. The 3 of them left around 1 in the morning. It was a wind-down phase. People were starting to trickle out, fall asleep in the corners or on the couch, or slinging shots in an effort to black out before it was finally over. Somebody had climbed over the counter in the kitchen to dance and spit bars. Another guy was arguing with his girlfriend in the driveway. All I could think about was the cleanup. Adam found me near the back door. "Hey man, we're gonna head out." The other two were behind him, already wobbling, grinning with that drunken glow. Adam raised his drink higher. "Congrats to all the seniors. Seriously, you fuckers earned it this year. Thanks for all the laughs and the guidance, the pressure and the fun. Here's to you." A few people by cheered. Somebody was clapping. Adam tipped his beer all the way back and finished it, then crushed the can against his forehead. Even more cheers followed that. The other two followed suit. They grabbed their bikes from the side yard and rolled them out toward the street. "You guys riding?" I asked with a laugh. "Yeah, it's fine," one of them said, half leaned over. They pushed off down the block laughing, swerving a little as they disappeared off into the dark. I remember thinking it was dumb, but also kind of funny. 3 drunk kids pedaling through a quiet town. Reminded me of my own high school years. Then went back inside and stopped thinking about them entirely. I didn't really sleep much. That was kind of unusual after a party. The house smelled like beer and sweat. People crashed wherever they could. Couches, floors, the basement. I finally passed out just before sunrise, after filling up a few trash cans with wrappers and beer cans, as well as about 500 red Solo cups. I woke up to my phone buzzing next to me. By the time I looked at it, there was already a ton of missed calls and texts. Group chats were lighting up, names I recognized relaying my perfect nightmare. "Did you hear? Something's wrong. Some kid didn't make it home last night." I sat up quickly in bed, still half drunk, trying to make sense of it. At first, I assumed it was nothing. Somebody crashed somewhere. Someone's parents were freaking out a little early. It happened all the time. Kids got drunk, stumbled the wrong way, and slept it off in the woods. It even happened to me. And then as I'm reading the messages, I hear sirens outside, and by mid-morning, it was everywhere. Adam's parents had reported him missing. The 2 boys he left with told the same story to anybody who asked. They were riding home. Adam fell behind, and when they turned around, he was gone. They circled the block, rode back and forth, calling his name for at least an hour. They said they heard a yelp, like a dog, one of them told people, or a coyote or something, but they eventually just went home. Around noon, I got a knock on my door. 2 cops were standing on my porch, one older and one younger, both calm and polite. "You the homeowner?" The older one asked me. My parents are," I said. "They're out of town though. Heard there was a party here last night." "Yeah." They asked me to walk him through it, who was here, how late it went, if I knew Adam Pratt, if I saw him leave. "Yeah, he left around 1 with 2 other guys on bikes. I walked them out and everything." "Were they drinking?" "Yeah, they were." "Any problems between him or anybody else?" "No, not at all. Everybody was cool. There wasn't any issues." They asked me to vouch for the people who had been there, and I did my best. I told them the truth. It was a big party. People came and went, but nobody was fighting. Nobody singled Adam out. Nobody had a reason to hurt him or have anything against him. The younger cop was writing everything down, and for some reason it just made me nervous as hell. The older one just kind of nodded along. "Right now we're assuming he's either wandered off drunk or something happened after he left. We're trying to establish a timeline. We're not here to arrest you or anything like that." They thanked me and then left. I stood there in the doorway long after they were gone, just watching the empty street. The house was quiet, but the street felt electric. I told myself, it's just a missing kid. He'll turn up embarrassed and just hungover. Still, cars and pedestrians patrolled every street, and by late afternoon, the town was crawling. Cars were moving at a snail pace. People stood in small groups on the sidewalk and the gas station, asking everybody that came by if they've seen this boy. Adam's picture then started circulating online. School photo, awkward smile. Volunteers gathering up at the edge of town where the fields were dropped away towards the drainage ditches and culverts that fed into the creek. I stayed home, had a party to clean up after, and I was still kind of in that denial phase. And that's when the cops came back. This time there was 3 of them and they weren't smiling. The older officer asked if we could talk outside, so I stepped out on the porch, my stomach fully ready to upchuck everything inside it. "We found Adam's bike," he said to me. I waited and looked at him. "It was in your dumpster." I laughed. I knew right away that was the wrong thing to do, and the cops stared at me for any kind of further reaction. That's not possible. I haven't gone anywhere." He didn't react. "The dumpster, out by the curb, the one right in front of your house?" They showed me pictures. Twisted frame, bent wheels. The front fork was cracked like it had been run over by a train or some kind of big truck. "I didn't put that there," I said. "I never left my house." "Look, we believe you," the younger cop said, "but that's why we need to ask a few more questions." They asked who stayed the night, who left late, if anybody might have come back to the party, if anybody had a reason to hide something in my trash. I didn't have any answers for them. They asked to search the house. I hesitated and then I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't want it to look like I had something to hide. All I wanted was to get all of this out of the way before my parents got home the next day. So they went room to room, opening doors, checking closets. One of them, of course, found my weed stash in the shoebox under my bed. He looked at it, looked at me, then closed the lid. "That's not what we're here for," he said. They didn't find anything else. After they left, I sat on my bed, trying to replay the whole night. Every face, every conversation, every moment that I wasn't really paying attention. I started to wonder if somebody from the party followed Adam and those others out, if somebody saw some kind of opportunity. That night, searchlights swept the field. Dogs barked off in the distance. I didn't sleep at all. I kept envisioning a helicopter banking out of the cloudy night, circling my house with a spotlight. They found Adam 2 days later. There was a sinkhole in a field on the edge of town, half hidden by tall grass. It led down into this old drainage pipe system that ran under the road. His body had been pushed and turned by the water, and it made things unclear. Hard to say exactly what injuries came from the fall and what might have happened before that. The official explanation? He stopped to take a piss by that field. It was dark, he didn't see the hole, and then plummeted 20 or 30 feet, hit his head and died. An accident, but not everybody bought it. People continued to talk about the bike, how smashed it was, about the rumor that somebody saw a car stopped on the bridge that night, trunk open, bike laying in the road, a hit and run. Somebody panicked, somebody tried to clean it up. But nothing ever came from it. The case closed quietly. Adam became a story people just told and talked about. Some blamed the party, of course, blaming me. Some blamed the town, drunk drivers, psychos. My parents never allowed me to host a party ever again. I graduated and left town a few months later. And to this day, I carry that survivor's guilt about what happened to Adam everywhere I go. Sometimes I think back about that toast, about Adam lifting up his beer, smiling, not just that night ahead of him, but his entire life for the taking. I think about how he rode off, about how easy it was for the dark to swallow him up. Rest easy, man. I grew up in a really small house at the edge of our neighborhood, where darkness ran the show once the sun went down. During the day, it didn't feel very isolated. Kids rode their bikes past our place, cars cut through their own way out of town, and everything felt nice and ordinary. At night, though, it got dark. Our porch light would barely even reach the yard, and beyond that was just black space and woodland. And that really never bothered me. I wasn't scared of the dark or animals or noises outside. The house was solid, safe. My parents were attentive inside this quiet, consistent way. They were involved in everything I did, encouraged me to try new things, and loved me throughout all of it. I trusted them completely, and because of that, I trusted the house. They wouldn't let anything bad happen to me, especially here. On weekends, they'd let me sleep in the living room. It was treated like this small reward, something special. I'd lay out a blanket on the floor, grab a pillow from my bed, and camp out in front of the TV. I'd watch whatever movies I could get my hands on, sometimes horror, sometimes funny girl movies. I ate popcorn straight from a mixing bowl, tried to stay awake as long as I possibly could. Most of the nights it was mission accomplished. I'd wake up late, covered in popcorn butter, TV still running. And that night in particular, it wasn't any different. I had the TV on, the living room was dark except for the screen, and I remember finishing my popcorn, setting the bowl off to the side, telling myself I'll stay awake a little longer. I don't remember drifting off, I just remember opening up my eyes again. The TV was still on, but the sound felt far away. It wasn't fear, it was just a sense that I was no longer alone, like the room had just been in motion before I woke up. My eyes started moving toward the front window without giving it any other thought. At first, I saw nothing, just a reflection of the TV and the curtains pulled most of the way close. And then, a shadow crossed the glass. I stayed still watching. The porch light wasn't on, so my eyes adjusted. I could barely make out the shape of a man moving across the porch. He was tall with a bald head. He wasn't trying to be quiet either. He dragged one of the chairs across the boards and then moved it to the small table. He moved quickly, rearranging everything on the porch. I didn't sit up, I didn't reach for anything. I just watched him shift the furniture around, lining up the chairs, then moving them again. The TV painted the wall and the glass all kinds of colors, which made it even creepier. When he finished, he stepped right up to the window. I felt my body go heavy, pretending to still be asleep without really thinking about it. Armor for most children, you know? He leaned forward, pressed his forehead into the glass, and peered through that narrow gap in the curtains. He was watching TV. I closed my eyes most of the way and slowed my breathing, leaving just enough space for me to see. The light from the screen lit his face up in these flashes, and his expression never changed. After a moment, his eyes would shift, and he looked right at me. It wasn't sudden. He glanced over, looked away, then looked back again. His eyes moved over me, taking in my face, my body on the floor, the blanket. There's no reaction to his face, which was haunting to my child mind. Was he expecting me to be there? I don't know, but I didn't move. Eventually, he turned back to the TV, and my thoughts started to catch up then. I wondered where he'd come from. Our house is not close to anything. There were woods behind us and scattered houses before town would pick up again. I pictured him walking through the trees and noticing the light from the window, following it like a moth to a flame. I didn't know how long he'd stayed there, but my legs fell asleep and so did my arms. I peeked an eye open and saw that he was gone. I waited for the shadow to come back, but instead, I heard footsteps moving across the porch. I waited a few more seconds after the footsteps started. They ended up moving toward the edge of my house. Hearing those familiar boards creak in the same ways they did when myself or my parents walked across them, it was nauseating. And that finally kicked me into action. I got up, ran down the hallway to my parents' room. I didn't bother knocking, just opened the door and whispered my dad's name. He was already awake, standing near the window with the curtains pulled back an inch. "What's going on?" I asked him. He didn't look at me right away. "I heard something outside," he said. "I thought it was you." So I told him about the man on the porch, that I'd seen him through the living room window. My dad nodded at me. He said he'd woken up a few minutes earlier when he heard those footsteps and had been waiting to see who it was. And that's when he saw the same man moving around out there. My dad picked up the phone and called 911. He kept his voice calm, gave our address, explained that there was somebody on the porch that he did not recognize. Then he opened the closet and took out a baseball bat. I remember thinking how strange it was to see him holding it like that, barefoot in his pajamas. He told me to stay in the hall and then went to the front door. I watched him from the corner as he opened it up and stepped onto the porch. He raised his voice, firmly speaking, telling the man that the police were on their way and that he needed to stay right where he was. And for a moment, nothing happened. The man stepped out from the darker side of the house like he'd been hiding. He didn't argue, he didn't speak. He walked over and sat down on the porch steps, hands in his lap, staring straight ahead. The strangest thing I've ever seen. The police would show up a few minutes later, ask him some questions, and ask my dad some more questions, then walk the man to their car. They told us they were taking him in for some kind of welfare check. He hadn't broken in or anything and done really anything wrong. He didn't even try to get inside. Technically, he wasn't in trouble. After they left, my dad fixed the furniture on the porch and checked the darker corners of the property, and he said everything looked normal, looked fine. I never saw that man again. Never heard anything about who he was or where he even came from. We didn't move, but I stopped sleeping in the living room after that. Even now, I think about how calmly he just sat on those steps, how comfortable he seemed to be waiting for the police. I still walk down that stoop every day, and it gives me chills to think about the guy and how relaxed he was, sitting right there, right where I was now. like he hadn't done anything wrong at all.
This took place back in the early 90s. I grew up in a very small village in Peru, right at the base of a mountain. Life there was simple. Dirt roads, everyone knew everyone. The kids played soccer until the sun went down. Of course, we call it football. That was what I was doing one afternoon. I was by myself, kicking around an old soccer ball in the open field near the edge of the village. I don't recall why I wasn't with my friends that day. After a while, I noticed something I had never seen before. Surrounding this field was a forest, which we were told to never enter. Prior to this, a young boy was killed by a fer de lance, the most dangerous snake in our country. Jaguars were also known to hunt these woods as well, although they seemed to keep their distance from the village after being shot at many times. After an El Niño hit our village, some of the trees had been uprooted or knocked over. The base of the mountain was now visible from the open field. There was a small, dark opening in the rock face that was once hidden by the bushes and tall grass. It looked like the mouth of a cave. At first, I ignored it, but after an hour, the curiosity started eating away at me. I told myself I would just take a quick look inside. No more than 5 minutes. The moment I stepped past the entrance, the air changed. It became thick and heavy, like I was trying to breathe underwater. My chest felt tight, and I immediately became on edge. There were many small holes and cracks in the rocks above me, so daylight cut through the darkness and lit the way. I kept going deeper, even though every part of me was screaming to turn back. I then saw something. Hanging from tiny ropes were these dolls, dozens of them, crude little figures made of cloth and sticks. Each one had these long, rusty spikes or nails driven straight into the head or neck. Some had multiple. They swayed slightly, even though there was no wind inside this cave. I felt my stomach turn. I had heard stories about the Bruja who were brought here by the Spanish centuries ago. It was said that they were once healers before the horrors of the Inquisition exposed them to the brutality of their own masters. They turned to dark magic in order to punish the conquistadors, but were unable to control it. The elders of my village would tell us that some of them still live in these mountains. It was of course another reason to never venture out into the forest. All the children would eventually dismiss the stories as a fable. Remote villages, especially in South America, all have stories like this. However, from the moment I saw those tiny dolls hanging from the ceiling, I regretted not taking those stories more seriously. I should have ran, but something kept pulling me forward. The tunnel narrowed even more, until I had to duck my head. It was around here that the outside light stopped coming through. However, I saw that the corridor made a sharp turn. From around the next corner, I saw the glow of firelight flickering on the rock walls. I entered to see the light was coming from 2 torches that were mounted on the rock, burning with a low, steady flame. They revealed the full cavern. I saw bones, skeletons embedded into the walls, like they had been pushed inside the rock itself. More hung from the ceiling like ropes, just like the dolls were. Others were stacked in piles on the floor. Some were clearly animal bones, but most of them were human. Some of the skulls were small, like a child's skull. I stared on in absolute horror, unable to breathe. My legs finally listened to me and I turned and ran as fast as I could, scraping my arms and knees on the rocks as I scrambled back toward the entrance. I burst back out into the daylight and didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the village. Before I could make it to my house, there was a neighborhood girl named Valentina. She was around the same age as me. She stepped out from behind a wall and stopped me. She looked concerned, and asked me what was wrong. I then told her about the cave, the hanging dolls, and the skulls and bones. While she was standing there, her eyes rolled into the back of her head until only the whites showed. A deep, demonic voice that definitely wasn't hers came out of her mouth, slow and clear.
"If you tell anyone about what you saw, your entire family will perish."
Valentina then collapsed to the ground. A second later, she woke up, confused, asking what happened. I helped her up, mumbled something about her fainting, then ran the rest of the way home without saying another word. I never told anyone else about what I saw. Not my parents, not my friends, not a single soul. I lived the rest of my life in Peru carrying that secret like a stone in my chest. I do remember that when I would return to the open field to play soccer with my friends, I was unable to relocate the cave mouth again. I did try searching for it in that same area, but it was nowhere to be found. In 2003, I finally moved to the United States. My parents passed away a few years ago, which were my last relatives that lived in Peru. For the first time in my life, I feel safe enough to speak about this. I still don't know exactly what I walked into that day. The stories of the Bruja from my village don't exactly match up with real history. But what I am certain of is that cave was used for some malevolent form of witchcraft. Some kind of ritual site, if I had to guess. Those tiny dolls with spikes in their heads, those bones that littered that cave, and that evil voice coming out of that little girl's mouth have stayed with me ever since. I'm fairly new to this channel, so if anyone listening has their own theories about my experience, I would love to hear them. This happened a few years back, outside of my workshop in Phoenix. I'm the guy you call when something with an engine breaks down. I've always been good at fixing cars, lawnmowers, and even off-road vehicles. So when my buddy calls me up and asks me to help him fix up this old dune buggy he bought off Facebook Marketplace, I said sure. He would have to pay, but sure. I knew a thing or two about dune buggies, and my friend had bought a piece of shit. But since I'm such a nice guy, I spent the next couple of weekends welding, swapping out parts, and getting it running again. The day finally came for me to test out my work. I told myself I would just do a short loop, nothing crazy, stay within a mile or two of the workshop, so I could walk back if anything went wrong. Of course, things went wrong. The buggy left me stranded maybe a mile out into the desert. Engine just took a dump, no warning. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't starting. No cell service out this way either. So I had no choice but to start walking back toward the workshop, kicking up dust with every step. The heat was brutal that day. The kind that makes the air sting your mouth until it feels like sandpaper. I kept thinking how stupid it was to come out this far, but I was sure I had the engine working fine. I figured I'd be back at the shop in 20 minutes tops, and I'll have to come back with my truck. About 10 minutes into the walk, I noticed something odd in the sky. A single dark cloud, very small at first. I can't explain how jarring that is to see, just hanging there in the sky. Then it started growing, like fast, unnaturally fast. In less than a minute, it had spread out and swallowed the whole sky above me, turning everything gray and heavy. The wind picked up hard, and all of a sudden, the desert was getting pelted by rain, loud drops hammering the sand. Thunder cracked so loud, I actually covered my ears and fell to one knee. I started running, not because I was scared, but because for one of only a handful of times in my life, I didn't want to get drenched. As I looked up toward a sandstone peak off in the distance, I saw something. A figure standing at the very top, perfectly still. over the howling wind, I could hear something else. A low, rhythmic chanting. That didn't sound like any language I had ever heard. It rose and fell with the wind, almost like it was calling to the storm. Lightning started striking the ground around me, way too close for comfort. I spotted the old roof of a decommissioned gas station up ahead and sprinted for it, ducking under the overhang, just as another bolt lit up the sky. I stood by one of the gas pumps, breathing hard, watching the rain come down in sheets. The chanting seemed to grow louder now, even though I was undercover. I kept scanning the ridge, but the figure had vanished into the downpour. I waited there, soaked, breathing hard. The storm was violent, but it only lasted for a few more minutes. Then, just like that, the clouds started breaking apart, and the rain stopped, and the thunder faded. The sky cleared like nothing had happened. I stepped back into the sand, and immediately noticed something was not right. I was still wet, but the ground was bone dry. The sand looked exactly like it had before the storm broke out. There were no puddles, no damp patches, nothing. I pulled out my phone and checked the weather forecast. Clear skies, 0 chance of rain. The same forecast it had been all day. I stood there for the longest time, heart still pounding, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The figure on the peak, the chanting, the way the single cloud had exploded across the sky, and then vanished, without leaving a single drop on the ground. It felt like something deliberate. I eventually made it back and grabbed my truck and towed the doom buggy back to the workshop. It was a clogged filter if you were curious. Fixed the engine the next day, and that was that. I still think about that phantom storm every now and again. Rain clouds don't just swallow the entire sky in seconds and then vanish without leaving a trace. And then there was that chanting. That figure standing up on the sandstone, almost like it was calling the storm down on purpose. I don't know what it's all about, but something tells me that this might be witchcraft related. Definitely not something I fuck with. Ever since, I make sure not to go too far out when I'm test driving something. This happened way back in the mid-1970s, when I was just a little kid growing up in a small town in Ohio, about 20 miles south of Cleveland. Our neighborhood was way out in the backwoods. In those days, it was just dirt roads, thick trees, and not much else. Me and a couple of other neighborhood kids, all between the ages of 7 and 9, used to play hide and seek almost every day after school, because there was nothing else to do. Our favorite spot was this big old abandoned 2-story house that sat behind the old neighborhood. It used to be a bed and breakfast at one time, and it was run by this old lady. When she passed away, the house sat empty for many years. No one bought it, no one tore it down. It was just there. Perfect for us kids looking for a good hiding spot. One afternoon, we were playing like usual. I wanted to pick a different hiding place so no one would find me too quickly. I snuck around the back of the house, pushed open the door, and made my way up the stairs to the attic. Unlike my house, which had the classic drawstring folding ladder, this attic had its own stairwell from the upstairs hallway. I climbed the creaky steps and entered. I froze in absolute horror. There was a row of lit candles on the floor, maybe 10 or 12 of them, leading straight across the attic like a path. At the end of the candles, lined against the far wall, was a sight I still can't get out of my head. Dozens of crows had been disemboweled, then hung up on the wall, with their wings spread out. Their insides were arranged in strange patterns on the floorboards. The smell hit me all at once, and I felt my stomach flip. I turned and ran. I didn't even try to be quiet. In fact, I was screaming. I flew down the stairs, burst out the back door, and sprinted straight to my friends who were still in the yard. "You guys have to come see this. There's candles and dead crows in the attic. Someone nailed them to the wall." They looked at me like I was crazy, but they followed me back anyway. When we got to the house, the back door was still open, but when we climbed the stairs to the attic door, it was locked. It wouldn't budge no matter how hard we pushed or kicked it. We couldn't see any candlelight flickering underneath the door either. My friends didn't believe my story. They said I was making the whole thing up, and that I was the one that locked the door. When I told my parents that night, they just laughed it off and told me to stop making up stories, and to also stop going into that old house. No one believed me. Not a single person. I actually listened to my parents, and avoided going in that house for future games of hide and seek, before it was finally torn down to make room for the expanding neighborhood. But before the bulldozers were sent in, workers pulled out several remains of animal skeletons, mostly birds, but a few bigger ones that may have been dogs or cats. They also found children's clothing. They were unable to determine who they belonged to. The police came and investigated the house before it got leveled. Other than more animal remains, they found nothing to indicate anyone had been murdered there. Decades have passed, and I still think about those lit candles and those poor crows nailed to the wall. I still wonder who was using that house to perform what looked like black magic, and if it had anything to do with the clothing that was discovered there. I highly doubt the police did a thorough enough job searching that house before it was bulldozed. I'm somewhat addicted to watching true crime shows, and I can tell you from personal experience. In rural Ohio, back in the 70s, the local police probably didn't even know what forensic evidence was. No one will ever truly know what took place in that old house in the years it sat there. I'm not a clairvoyant whatsoever, but something tells me that if someone took a shovel and started digging where that house used to be, they would most certainly unearth human remains.
I used to work at Walmart as a cashier. Sometimes I would see some weird things working there, especially late at night. But the one that takes the cake is something that happened one particular night when I was fairly new to the job. So this was way back in the fall of 2004. I had just recently got my job at Walmart and was working as a cashier. I had only been there for maybe a month. I was only 17 and this was my first job ever. During this time, I did not have a car and would rely on my parents to drive me to and from work. So one time, I was working sometime in the afternoon until like 10 o'clock at night. Maybe 11 o'clock, I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember that it was pretty late. The shift was pretty average from the start. I don't remember a whole lot about early in it, but I do know that when it got to be nighttime, things were pretty quiet as usual. There were not many people there, and I would only have somebody come into my checkout line every here and there. Eventually, when I was off in maybe an hour, things were even more quiet. Then I saw someone approach my checkout. It was a man who looked like a clown. He was wearing pretty much normal clothes from what I remember, but then he had his face painted all white, and his hair was either painted red or it was a wig. His nose was red, and all around his lips was also red as well, and then he had painted on his eyebrows. It was the full clown look, and it was so much so that I had absolutely no idea what the guy really looked like. It was a strange thing to see, and I didn't know why he was looking like a clown. It was not Halloween, and I didn't know of any events going on nearby or anything like that. When I saw him, I don't remember what he was buying, but I think he was just getting like one or two things. I said hi, and then I asked him what he was doing looking like a clown. I was curious, and I remember that I asked it in a cheerful and friendly way. However, the clown looked at me with a very serious face, almost a glare, and did not answer. I thought maybe he lost a bet or something, and I asked him if he lost a bet. He still said nothing and just looked at me angrily. I said sorry and nothing else. The only other time either of us said anything was when I told him the price, and then he paid. He seemed very serious and borderline angry, and it made me nervous. So he took his stuff and then walked away and left the store. I continued on with work after that. For the next bit of time, mostly there really wasn't anything to do. Eventually, I got another customer in my checkout line and scanned their items for them. However, later on, when I was off in maybe 10 minutes, I remember that I saw a coworker walking by. It was someone who I was friendly with. He told me that there was a man dressed as a clown just walking around the parking lot. I said that that guy had been in my checkout line. My coworker said that it was really weird, and then he walked away. Then, a few minutes later, I was finally off of work. I went over and clocked out, and then I went out to wait for my mom to pick me up. Normally, I would sit out on the bench that was on the sidewalk directly in front of the Walmart building. When I got outside and sat down, things were obviously very quiet, as you could imagine. There were far less cars now in the parking lot, so I could see a large amount of it. Only about a minute or so into waiting, I saw the clown guy again. He was walking at the far side of the parking lot towards the back. He walked over a ways, and then he turned and started going up another road towards the store. I did not know what he was doing. The way it looked was that he was just walking around, not really doing anything. I remember that he was walking very slowly too. It was really weird. He walked up that row and then crossed over into the row that was closer to me. I'm not going to lie, I was just watching him the whole time because it was so strange. When he started walking down the row closer to me now, he looked over and noticed me watching him. Then he stopped and just stared at me, once again with a very serious look. I looked away, but when I looked again like 10 seconds later, he was still there, staring at me. He hadn't moved at all. Now, he was still a good 100 feet away from me or so, but it was still unsettling. After staring at each other for a while longer, I waved, not knowing what else to do, to try to be friendly. He did not wave back. He just stood there and kept staring at me. Then I saw him shake his head almost in disgust, and then turn and walk back to another row of cars sort of away from me. He continued with his walk through the parking lot. I really didn't think that this guy was simply joking around and trying to be funny. It seemed like he was really serious. He then walked back over to the other row of cars to where he had been before that was closer to me. When he did, he once again caught me watching him and stopped and started glaring at me. He wasn't moving like before, but this time I had had enough. I got up and just walked back over to the doors and went inside the store. I waited for my mom in there for the rest of the time until she came to pick me up. Finally, a few minutes later, she was there. I quickly got inside the car and we left. When we did, I looked around for the creepy clown guy and I saw him. He was still there, standing in the parking lot and staring at me again. My mom saw him too, and I was glad that we were leaving. After that, I never saw him again. I still don't know who he was or what he was doing. I'm not sure if anyone from Walmart ever told him to leave or not. Back then, our store was open 24 hours, so he could have theoretically gone back in at any point. It was just really weird how he was so serious, yet painted as a clown. I'm just glad that I didn't see him anymore.
So, I'm a 23-year-old female. This happened when I was 15 years old. It was February 2017, and I got a friend request, and I accepted it. It was from this guy from Serbia. Martin was the name he used. He had started talking to me, and we quickly had started talking every day, just as friends though. But then later on, he told me he loves me, and I also started developing feelings for him, so I told him I loved him too. I was so in love with him that I was blind to all of the red flags that he was showing me. He never wanted me to tell anything to my parents. He also didn't seem very happy when he realized I told my parents something as simple as being in a relationship. After a year, it's 2018 at this point, his behavior towards me suddenly changes. He went from being nice and funny to calling me a whore, accusing me of cheating on him. I have never done any of that. I cried and kept repeating that I didn't cheat on him and I'd never do that. Mind you, we're still talking over a video call. I lived in Germany and he lived in Serbia, but he started talking to me, probably because I'm originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and because I was young, too dumb to know better. And at one point when he had started trusting me again, after his paranoid phase that I've mentioned went away, he said that he wants to propose to me and marry me. I said yes. I was so happy because I truly loved him and I wanted to be his wife. However, I knew there was a problem, and it was my parents. I was 16 and I wanted to move and get married. Of course, they wouldn't let me, so he made a deal that he's going to get me a van transportation to Serbia. That's what we did. On the day before I was supposed to flee, he told me to not bring a lot of clothes because he'll buy me all the clothes I need when I get to Serbia. Now, of course, looking back, this was a humongous red flag. But back in the day, I thought it was nice because all he cared about is me and everything else including clothes came second. I also packed my wallet along with my charger, phone, and passport. I snuck out of my house at 3:28 a.m. My mom was asleep. I couldn't get a hold of my shoes because they were in a separate room that had this door that makes a loud scraping noise as it rubs against the wood, so I put on my slippers and left the door slightly ajar, because if I closed it, it would make that rubbing noise and my mom would probably wake up. I got in a van that was near the hotel, which was 10 meters from my house. After 15 minutes, the driver got out, I greeted him, and I got in the van. We started driving and picking up other people. At 8-something a.m., my mom called me and asked me where I was, and I lied to her and said that I was at a store just buying things. She told me to send her my location, and I knew that she knew I was trying to flee. I hung up because I knew if I answered the phone, she could probably track my call, so I always let the phone ring without answering. She called the police, and she also called my dad. They've been separated since 2003 and divorced since 2007, so he lived in a completely different city an hour and a half away from her. He was on his way to his friend's house to return a vacuum, so he immediately rang the doorbell and told his friend to just take everything because he's in a rush. His friend asked why he was in a rush, and he said it's because his daughter ran away. The friend gathered all of his guns, put them in the truck, and they made themselves on their way to Serbia. My mom called my boyfriend and asked him where I was, and we actually made up the story of me and him breaking up so she'd believe I'm just somewhere in a park drunk and drinking away my pain. In order to somewhat prove that claim to her, I had started slurring my texts and misspelling words on purpose just so that she would think I was really drunk. Obviously, she didn't believe it, but she went around and searched every park just on the off chance that I'm there. She asked him again where I was, and he said he didn't know because I never told him. Then she called one of her cousins. He's a special story. He knows a lot of people, especially criminals. He told her to mention some guy called Nanad Crutches. Yes, the things that help you walk. And that's when he said there was no need for violence, and he immediately told her that I'm in a van and on my way to Serbia. My mom at one point texted me and told me she's just going to talk. She doesn't need me to say anything. She just wants me to answer the phone and listen to what she says. I did, and she then convinced me to give the phone to the driver. I said that I can't do that right now because he's driving. I told her I'll give it to him when he makes a stop, so I did. I called her when we made a stop, and she told me to give my phone to the driver. He answered the phone, and I don't know what she told him because it wasn't on speaker, but she definitely told him I was underage, that I had epilepsy. That is true. I've had it since the age of 12. And that she had already called the police, gave them my information so that they could immediately contact the border control, letting them know that they should arrest anyone with my passport and not let them through. The driver then realized there's no way out if he takes me with them. Then he started negotiating where to drop me off so someone could pick me up. He never wanted to drop me off somewhere where you had a lot of police. That should have also been a red flag, but it wasn't. He decided to drop me off somewhere next to some fast food place. I got off, he left. Then when I was next to some sushi place, I called my dad and told him where I was. He told me to turn on my location, and I did. Then he told me to wait outside because he'll call the police to get me. After about 10 or 15 minutes, 2 officers came up to me and told me to follow them to the car. I did. They drove me to the station and searched me and my bag. At one point, I almost got into a fight with one of them because she was messing with my bra and moving it. Luckily, they both decided I was clean. They put me in this holding cell. I had a bed, a metal toilet, and a sink. They also gave me a blanket and told me what button to press if I needed something. I fell asleep, and then after some time, one of them came and woke me up and told me that my dad was here to pick me up. So I got up and she led me to the office where my dad was along with his friend talking to the chief. He took my passport. I then got in the car with him and his best friend. He seemed very relaxed, and he even answered in a funny, goofy voice when I called him. That's how I knew he was absolutely pissed. His friend got to his house, then my dad got out of his car and told me to get in his car. I did. He got in and he took me to his house so he could sleep a little bit. His wife came while I was sitting in the living room and she asked me why I did it, that I could have been kidnapped and killed, that or sold to the human trafficking ring. Then she also told me that she would have killed her daughter if she tried the same. After about an hour or two, my dad woke up and they both greeted him with good morning. I said the same, but he just looked at me all pissed without saying anything to me. He then got ready and he told me to get up. We walked to his car. Mind you, he's not talking to me. He only talks when he has to. I got in, and then about halfway through the drive to my mom's house, he told me that I'm lucky that my mom called and specifically told him not to do anything to me. She said she knew I would have escaped again if he tried intimidating me, because then he said that he would have kicked me repeatedly with his legs until I couldn't get up. I didn't say anything. He drove me back to my mom's house. She didn't really say anything either. She was just happy I was back. Then 2019 came. This is when we were arguing nonstop. Yes, we kept talking. My dad at one point took away my phone, so then I couldn't talk to my boyfriend anymore. Well, I had saved up some money and bought myself a new one. I remember in Bosnia visiting my relatives, and I told him to come to Bosnia to see me. I said that if he doesn't do it, I'd leave him. I gave him 24 hours. I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he was in Serbia. The drive from his town to mine would have lasted about 4 hours, so he could have come like 6 times. The next day, I was getting ready to hit the city, so I texted him and asked him if he's at the pizza parlor I told him to be at. He said he has bad news. I didn't care to listen. I said it's a yes or no question. After some time, he said no. So I told him, okay, we're done. I hung up the phone, blocked him, and that's how my love saga ended. But it wasn't the last time I'd heard from him. After 3 months, I've heard from someone that he's accused for the organized kidnapping, torture, and murder of a girl who was also 17 at the time. This took place that was 2 hours away from where my relatives in Bosnia lived. The case was gruesome. I heard she was found in a sewer. Then after the medical examiner performed the autopsy, he said that she was so beaten to the point her shoulder was dislocated, and that she had also been repeatedly penetrated by glass bottles. 2 years later, 2021 rolls around, and he made a new profile on Instagram and texted me. I didn't answer. Then 2 years later, 2023 rolled around, and again he made a new profile and texted me on Facebook. I couldn't see what it was because he had deleted the text right after sending them. Then months later, he started texting me again. 2024, he kept texting me. Even now in 2025, he still hasn't stopped. He's still texting me and he's still trying to find me. Luckily, I've moved to a whole different place in Germany. I'm also enrolled in medical school. However, this did mess me up a little. I'm heavily opposed to any type of emotional connection or dating. I'm opposed to anything that involves trust because I just have issues with trusting people. I've seen the worst they're capable of when you trust them. So now I don't want to put myself in that situation by trusting anyone. I've been single for 6 years, and I see myself not finding anyone anytime soon. I have a message for everyone. Be very careful. Don't lose your logical thinking just because you've happened to fall in love. Love is no longer what it used to be. Now it's used as a weapon. This happened when I was 13 in the spring of 2004. I grew up in the country in a small town where doors tend to not be locked at night, at least back then. This is going to be from the point of view of my parents, as I didn't know about this until after the fact. I think I had slept over at a friend's house the night before this particular morning, and said friend's mom drove us to school that day. My dad was getting ready for work one morning, and while he was waiting for his truck to warm up, it was still cool in the early morning, by the way, at this time of the year, so yeah. Well, anyways, he went into the garage for something. Our garage was half workshop, half storage, and he went into the workshop half, likely for a tool or something. Out of the corner of his eye, he had noticed a pair of sneakers underneath some insulation. Someone was sleeping in our garage. Within an instant, he flew into the house past my mom in her office, and in a calm but serious tone then said, "Call the sheriff," as he went to go get his gun. He then stood over the man with his gun on him until the police arrived. The man didn't try anything, as he was apparently high on some drug. I'm not sure which. Like I said, I grew up in the country and our town didn't have its own police force back then, being that small. It ended up being the state police that came out, I think 45 minutes or so after my mom called. They arrested the guy, and come to find out, he had just been released from jail the day before, his mom paying his bail. He was a junkie and was there on a drug charge. They were driving home from jail and they got into an argument. She kicked him out of her car and he started walking, eventually finding his way to our garage. Later on, after the police took the man away and my dad had gone to work, our neighbor came over to my mom to let her know that a ton of my dad's tools were in the backyard. Apparently this guy had planned on stealing my dad's tools to sell, but was either too tired or high to get very far and decided to just take a nap in the garage. And you see how that worked out. My parents went to court for this man's trial, and from what I remember, he was sent back to jail, likely staying there much longer this time, since he was only out on bail before. This may not be too scary, but as an adult, I see much more to be afraid of now versus as a teen. My parents always kept me safe, and I pretty much had a sheltered, albeit happy childhood. What really scares me now looking back is that in the workshop there was a hidden key to our house. It was there when I could find it to get into the house after school in the event I ever lost my house keys. If he had gotten into the house, what could have happened that night? All I know is I'm grateful my parents were armed and knew how to handle this situation. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and take care, everyone. So let me start with this. I'll be using aliases for this story, as my coworkers and I would like to keep our identities hidden. I'll be referred to in this story as L. I'm a 19-year-old male with high-functioning autism. I mention it because I notice I often have a problem actually knowing I'm in danger and reacting as such unless I get hurt. I work as an assistant photographer / cashier at a booth to take Santa photos. It was Black Friday at the mall that I was working at, so there were a lot of people, mostly parents and their kids. Even encountered a Karen at this shift, but that's another story for another time. Later into my shift, 2 hours before we could all clock out, we got a family of around 18 people, all even getting dressed in suits for these photos. So I was sharing some of the anxiety that me and my coworkers felt as they were probably going to be here for a while. Then suddenly, we hear this massive stampede of footsteps as me, my coworkers, the family and Santa, and even those waiting in line all turn to look as we first see a panic crowd of people running towards the exit presumably. We then hear a booming voice.
"Get down!"
At first, I thought this was an earthquake that hit the mall in a specific spot. Then I thought of the worst possible outcome, even though I and no one else heard gunshots from where we were. I got on the ground with my coworkers, but my coworker Pamela had the idea to hide in the curtained cubby that's right next to the photo printers. Seeing as we're out in the open, we join her as we cram ourselves into the cubby with some of the family joining us. I had to motion Santa to get down through the top opening as he was the most exposed, even though it likely wouldn't have made much of a difference. I used my phone camera as a mirror to make sure Santa was okay, and he was, thankfully. We had to stay there for a bit, and I was just so anxious thinking that the shooter might turn the corner and we'd be sitting ducks, but that didn't happen. Security tells us to get up and to quickly and calmly proceed to the exit. One of my coworkers handed Santa his cane and told me to get out of here, as Santa will be fine. So I ran outside still in my uniform as my coworkers and Santa soon followed. As if it wasn't confirmed by this point, there was an active shooter scenario as I saw SWAT begin to enter the building. We all sat in the parking lot with a lot of others. I had to call my boss to inform her of the situation. I also let Pamela use my phone to call her dad. I wasn't about to deny that as I was texting my mom the entire time as well. After things died down, I began to walk down the street as my parents were waiting for me, and I just wanted to get home by this point. I'm glad my coworkers were able to punch me out of my shift. Seeing as it was my first 8-hour shift, I really appreciate that. I wrote this about a week after the shooting. Thankfully, they caught the guy. He was a 17-year-old kid. As for the victims, Only 3, and thankfully no one was killed. I'm so glad it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. This really reminds me that life is short and can easily be shortened if a maniac is having a bad day and decides I'm their target. Maybe a bit misanthropic of me, but when it's your life, it's really difficult to feel bad for the bastard who could potentially take it, at least in the moment. But anyway, that's my story. Maybe it isn't as scary as some of the others, but knowing you could be moments away from getting shot is scary. Even though I didn't feel as freaked out as I could have been, I think it would have been worse if I heard gunshots. Never thought my first job would have this happen, but we can never predict these things. I'm just glad I got out of this alive and unscathed. This story may not be scary in the sense other ones are, but at the time it was very unsettling. It took place in Glasgow in 2011. I went to a college outside the city center, and the story involves a couple of people in my course, which was television broadcasting production. Louise was a very well-liked student on the course. She was very friendly, very bubbly, and very pretty. She had bright dyed red hair and very pale skin. She looked a little like Hayley Williams from Paramore. There were a couple of guys on the course who were friends with her, but were obviously keen on being more than friends with her. There was the time before I was aware of the incel community, and I was naive about how some young men view women. These guys made sexist comments and would make inappropriate jokes about women. These 2 guys, Mike and James, were obsessed with filmmaking and the internet. They had allegedly both made inappropriate comments to Louise, and although she didn't appreciate them, she appeared to not let it bother her. I hadn't heard any of these comments myself, but in hindsight, I wish I'd stepped in. I did once ask her if she'd like me to have a word, but she said no and appeared very confident that she'd handle it if things went too far. She was sure they were just joking and were just very immature. As the months passed by on the course, things seemed fine, and I thought about the things Louise had highlighted about James and Mike. Towards the end of the course, we were tasked with making 2-minute short films, and our course lecturer divided us all into teams of 3. You can probably guess who Louise ended up with in her team. My short film was a very poorly made science fiction comedy thing, which wasn't remotely funny. Louise's film was due to be a crime thriller type thing, which sounded really good, but it didn't really work out like this. So the story goes, Louise, Mike, and James scripted out their short film and seemed happy with their script when it came to filming. Louise didn't really want to act in her film. However, she was convinced to do it by James and Mike. They filmed their short in James' house, and Louise was to play the victim of a home invasion. His parents were away on holiday, so they'd have the house to themselves. When it came to filming, Louise was to sit in a chair and to be taped to it. James and Mike duct taped her wrists and arms to the armrests of the chair, and they taped her ankles together. Record was then pressed on the camera. She was feeling a little anxious at this point, as there was something very off about their demeanor, and Louise wished she'd refused to be the actor for this scene. She was about to suggest that they pause, but before she could get the words out, she felt duct tape quickly being wrapped around her mouth. This took her by surprise, as this was not in the script. Her nostrils were flaring and she tried talking, but her mouth was heavily taped, so this wasn't possible. She then tried to say, "What the hell are you guys doing?" But no words made it through the tape. Louise said that she was sure she was having a nightmare at this point and closed her eyes, hoping to wake up. However, when she opened her eyes, she was devastated to realize she was bound and gagged in James' house for real. She caught her reflection in a nearby mirror, and she said her cheeks were bulging over the shiny silver duct tape, and her hair was in agony as the tape was applied very tightly to it. The camera had been turned on, and James and Mike were now just staring at Louise behind the camera. She was breathing very loudly through her nose, and she was terrified. They finally said after many minutes, "We know this isn't part of your script, Dawson, but we thought we'd improv." Louise was terrified and confused. "We know you weren't keen to act, so we added this to get that reaction from you. It looks great." Louise was shocked that this was part of some weird improvised segment that these 2 creeps had added purely to get a genuine reaction from her. These were short films for a film course that nobody would even watch. They weren't supposed to be Oscar-nominated shorts, so the fact that these 2 took it this far was disturbing. They began to remove the gag from Louise's mouth, and she grunted and mumbled as her hair was being pulled out with the removal of the tape. As soon as the final piece of tape was removed from her mouth, she began screaming at them and rightly berated them for this. They apparently were shocked and stunned by her reaction. Louise demanded that they cut her arms and feet free and stormed out of James' house. Our course lecturer spoke to both of them, and both were only given a warning about this. We couldn't believe it. If anything, they should have been kicked off the course at the very least. To make things more infuriating, both of these creeps continue to work in the TV industry to some degree. Louise does too, and she's been very successful. I have also been grateful to have had a successful career in television here in the UK for the last decade or so. But the fact that these two continue to work in the industry despite their views and behavior leaves a really bad taste in the mouth. The television and film industries obviously have a very bad record for having unsavory people in front and behind the camera. So in some ways, I'm not surprised that these two are still present in the industry. But I do wonder if they've done anything else such as this. I hope that they have matured and moved past their incel stage. But it really irks me that Louise didn't really get any form of justice for this incident.
Grief can do some strange things to people. That's what I was always told anyway. My mom first told me that when one of my high school friends lost her sister and started dressing up and acting like her sister. It made sense to me then, and I went out of my way to befriend her. Now, we're still close BFFs to this day, incidentally, and that's relevant to the story because she's a bit of a LetsRead fangirl, and she's the one who encouraged me to write in with this tale. Now, don't worry, she won't mind that I've included the personal little bit about her. She's proofreading and approving the whole thing, by the way. Now, this incident happened when I was 19. I've taken a year out after high school before going to college so I could work and put together some savings to avoid my student loans from being sky high. It didn't really work, but at least I tried. Now, this was back in I think maybe 2012 when Facebook was still really popular. We had a local neighborhood watch. I wasn't really a member as such. I didn't go to meetings or get involved, but I was their honorary mascot, which meant that I was a member of the Facebook group. Now one day, I logged on to find the group totally abuzz. A whole bunch of the neighbors had witnessed something straight out of a horror movie, apparently. As the previous night, an elderly woman had been walking up and down the street, pushing an industrial-style shopping cart. No harm done, right? Well, the shopping cart contained a full-sized coffin. And she wasn't just walking down the street once. She was walking down the street, disappearing for a while, and then walking back the way she came. One of the neighbors, a night owl guy that I knew, his name was James, decided to follow her at a distance. He discovered that she had been walking in a circle around a few blocks and then turning around at a certain point and repeating the circuit in reverse. Everyone's posts were rife with speculation. Why was she carting a coffin around? Was that even legal? Apparently it looked like a fairly battered, dirty coffin, and some of the theories were wild. Now it took me, a 19-year-old girl, to provide a grounded suggestion. It was a Halloween prop. It was the start of October, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. Now James immediately shot my idea down. I hadn't seen her. Why would this extremely elderly lady be walking a circuit around the block with a spirit Halloween coffin in a shopping cart? That's a good point, James, but had he considered dementia? Maybe the old lady lived on the next street over and she was suffering from sundown syndrome, which causes dementia sufferers to start acting weird right after nightfall. It was as good an explanation as any. But whatever. It had happened, it was over, and I guess we'd never know, I said. But wrong. I was very wrong. And the next night, the old woman was back, walking her little loops, and this time, James called me up. Now, I'm sure he'd been waiting for an excuse to call me. The guy actually did have a crush on me since middle school, and he told me to look out my window. Now, sure enough, the old woman was there, and she was really, really old. I was amazed that she had the strength to push a shopping cart around at all, let alone one with a coffin in it. And she wasn't pushing it slowly either. She was striding around like a woman half her age. Now, one thing I noticed that nobody else had seemed to pick up on was that this coffin really did not look like some spirit Halloween prop. If so, it was the most realistic prop I'd ever seen. and it looked a lot more like a film or TV prop than anything else. At least it couldn't be a real coffin, could it? Now, this whole fiasco went on for another few days. I was on vacation from work, so I was happy to play night owl for a while, and then, that Sunday night, the elderly woman didn't show up. I breathed a sigh of relief, and perhaps this was the end of it. No. The next day, Monday, she was back, and I couldn't help but notice that the coffin was starting to look a little worse for the wear. It had been raining almost constantly for a week, mostly some light rain but heavier in the daytime, and I wondered if she'd been storing the coffin outside because it certainly looked like the wood was starting to get mold and splinter a little bit. Tuesday came and went, and I saw her again. Now the old woman was starting to fall apart. I really started to pay attention to her appearance. She looked almost confused and scared. Her gait, which had been strong to start with, was really starting to falter, and I was beginning to be more and more convinced that this was dementia. Now, the rest of the neighborhood watch seemed hesitant to get involved, even James. I think he even spooked them out a little. When I kept insisting that we should do something, the adults kept telling me to leave it. She wasn't doing any harm, and there must be a good explanation for it. Now, a far cry from the first night, which had set the whole of the neighborhood watch abuzz. On Wednesday, the woman was really struggling. I'd become used to her role by now, and by my reckoning, it was taking her about twice as long to do her route. Now on Thursday, she was struggling even further because one of the wheels on her shopping cart had gone all gimpy, and she really had to struggle to keep it straight. On Friday night, I decided I was going to go outside and actually approach her. Now, my parents were away for the weekend. I didn't tell anyone about what I was going to do, as she was an elderly woman who must have been in at least her mid-80s. What was the worst she could do? And so I left my house shortly before I knew that she'd show up and pretended I was outside having a smoke, and I bumped into her by complete accident. It was very clear to me that she was confused. She kept calling me Gloria, which isn't even slightly my name, but eventually I managed to persuade her to open up. And the story she told me was heartbreaking and tragic. The old woman used to live somewhere around here with her husband many years ago. He passed sometime in the 80s, and they'd frequently gone for evening walks around the block, and she had it in her mind that if she started taking those long walks again, she might be able to reconnect with him. At first, her story brought me to tears. The whole thing was so tragic, and she reminded me much of my great-grandma, who had succumbed to Alzheimer's when I was younger, and I wanted to hug the old woman, who told me her name was Ethel, but it felt like it'd be intrusive. Now, I was so focused on the story that she told me that I almost forgot about the coffin itself, and suddenly it struck me. She was walking the neighborhood to reconnect with her husband, but she was carting this coffin around. It couldn't be, could it? I allowed myself to actually look at the coffin. Now, I'd been avoiding looking the whole time, as I suspected that the wood had started rotting in places, and there were a couple of holes in the coffin lid that had led me into the interior. Thankfully, I couldn't see much, but I could see enough. There definitely was some type of bones in that coffin. My hands started shaking, and I told Ethel to wait where she was because I wanted to help her, and then I stepped away a little, called 911, and whispered to the dispatch about what was happening. I told them that if they send the cops, please don't send them with sirens because she was a very old, vulnerable woman, and I didn't want to give her a heart attack or anything. However, it wasn't Ethel who risked having a heart attack. When I turned back to comfort her, I was absolutely horrified to see that she had opened the coffin. Years in the ground had not done her husband justice. It was mostly bones, with patches of shriveled skin in places. His clothes had all rotted off, and one thing that stuck with me was that his scalp was partially intact, and strands of hair hung down one side of his skeletal face. I almost screamed then and ran, but I didn't want to startle Ethel. She seemed so proud to be showing off her husband, as if opening the coffin to show me had suddenly reunited her with her beloved. It's very strange, this feeling of terror and revulsion and grief and sympathy all at once, but I can safely say that I've experienced that combination. I talked to Ethel for a few minutes, trying to keep my eyes off the corpse next to us, which holy hell did it reek. When the cops pulled in, without the sirens on as I requested, and I was unbelievably relieved. Everything was quiet, controlled chaos after that. They took poor Ethel away in a police car and she stayed fully silent. They called a coroner to come for the coffin and the body, and meanwhile, it all suddenly hit me and I started shivering and convulsing in shock, so I was actually carted off to a hospital eventually. It turned out that Ethel's husband's coffin had been stolen 5 years ago. Ethel was 93 at the time that I met her. It was very clear to all of us that an 88-year-old woman was not capable of exhuming a coffin and transporting it out of a graveyard. Whoever helped her has, as far as I'm aware, still never been identified. Ethel fell into a catatonic state immediately following the events. She spent some months in a nursing home, during which I visited her at least twice a week. Now, eventually pneumonia took her, and I hope she's finally reunited with her husband, who I found out was named Clive. Thankfully, I was able to find some photos of him with Ethel in her room that her granddaughter had brought for her, and it was much better a way to picture Clive than the rotting, decomposing corpse he'd been when we first met. Now, I don't think I'll ever get that sight out of my head. It was horrific, tragic, and a terrifying series of events. But it did make for one heck of a story for the Neighborhood Watch Facebook group. Do you like fire, Joel? I used to. I used to enjoy bonfires and campfires. I used to love staring into the flames and imagining I could see all kinds of magical things in them. Now, fire just fills me with fear. Not just because of one event, but because of two. They occurred a few months apart, but they are almost certainly linked. The first event happened when I was walking home from town one day. I live within walking distance of the shopping district. Yay for the UK and its tiny landmass, so walking into town was a weekly trip for me. I live in a no-through terrace street with footpaths on one end. One leads from the town/train station, and the other leads to the suburbs and further out of town. I was walking down the footpath leading to my street when I noticed a group of 3 very drunk, very loud people just ahead of me. 2 men and a woman. I could hear them over the sounds of Rammstein playing through my headphones, but I shut off my iPhone so I could hear them clearer. They were some of the most vulgar, unpleasant people I have ever had the misfortune to follow, and I prayed that they didn't stop, turn around, and see me. They were clearly 50,000 sheets to the wind, and from the sounds of their jabbering, they were looking for a fight with someone. Anyone, probably. Thankfully, they were too focused on heading to wherever to stop and turn around. As I reached the turning into my street, they crossed over to the next footpath. I watched with disgust as one of them tossed a cigarette butt into the hedge of my neighbor at the end of the street. As soon as I got home and unpacked my shopping, I headed upstairs and checked out the window. I was a little concerned about the discarded cigarette butt because it was a dry summer and the hedge had started turning brown and dry. And before I even had a chance to scope out the end of the street, I knew something was up. It looked like it was snowing, in August, and I quickly realized that ash was blowing past my window. I quickly looked out to the right and saw that flames were licking up my neighbor's hedge. I grabbed my phone and called a couple of neighbors, ones that I knew were members of the Neighborhood Watch, and then I immediately ran outside. Before I even had a chance to get halfway down the street, the entire hedge, and I'm talking an extremely large, deciduous hedge here, had caught fully ablaze. Other neighbors started emerging from their houses, and we felt helpless as we realized that there was pretty much no way to get any kind of water towards the hedge. A bunch of us had called the fire brigade, but we had to watch in horror as the fire spread across the garden and caused the large tree in the center of my neighbor's front garden to suddenly erupt into flames. Now, it seemed like it took mere seconds for the tree to turn into a smoldering, blackened trunk and dead branches. Thankfully, that killed this part of the fire, but there was still the hedge to contend with, and with the danger of the fire spreading to the house. Thankfully, the fire brigade got there and managed to control the blaze. Once things had calmed down, I drew one of the firemen aside and told him about the trio that I'd seen tossing a potentially lit cigarette butt into the hedge, as it was clear that this had caused the fire. Now, to my surprise, the fireman seemed completely disinterested. In fact, he acted like I was an annoyance or like he didn't believe me. And this really infuriated me because I guess I was a younger person at the time, and obviously young people, and when I say young, I mean mid-20s, apparently can't be taken seriously. And this event is what caused me to finally, properly join the neighborhood watch. I did pretty well in my first few months as a fully fledged member. I recruited other neighbors and persuaded them to join. As someone who often works nights, I kept an eye out and was able to scare off at least 1 or 2 potential vehicle vandals. I saw a guy dealing weed on the corner a few times, but I'm not that much of a narc, so I let that one be. And then, one night, I was up very late playing video games on the computer in my room at the back of the house. Now, I forget what I was playing, but it must have been something quiet because, despite wearing headphones, I was able to hear what sounded like fireworks coming from outside. Now, it wasn't remotely fireworks season, and when I heard a second bang, I realized that it sounded more like a gunshot than a firework, but not quite that either. I climbed over my bed and peered out the window. A disturbing orange glow was coming from the back garden of one of the houses on my side of the street, right at the end. Now, at first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing until I heard another explosion and a pillar of flame shot up into the air. Immediately, I called the fire brigade and then the leader of the neighborhood watch. I still wasn't sure which garden was on fire. My friends live at the penultimate house in the terrace, and I was worried it was their garden. I ran outside and was surprised to discover I was alone. The first thing I did was run to the end of the street, and that's when I realized that it was the side garden of the final house in the row, number 20, which was on fire. And from what I could tell, it was the garden shed, but the flames were licking dangerously towards the house itself, which was pretty dilapidated and, in particular, had a wooden balcony which could easily catch fire. I ran straight to number 19 and knocked, waking them up, and started yelling that the next door was on fire and it could spread to their house and they needed to get out of there right away. Now, as soon as I left number 19 with the family in tow, I was met by other neighbors who had also heard the commotion. A few of us had already called the fire brigade at the same time, and we were assured that they were on their way. I looked around, and I could not see the guy who lived in number 20. I assumed that he would have been first to evacuate, but no. Entering his garden was impossible, as he had a big wooden gate which was locked and would have been too slow to climb over. So in my infinite wisdom, I decided to head down the footpath that headed into town and try and yell for the guy who lived there, and also his cat, who I was very fond of. I took a few steps down from the footpath when suddenly there was another explosion from the shed. A huge, billowing wall of flame rolled over the wall and came thundering towards me, and the fire got so close to me that it singed my eyebrows and the hairs on my arms. I jumped backwards. If I had taken one single step forwards, I would have been hit by that wall of flame. Now, I'm certain that someone was looking out for me that day because I was so close to being immolated that, damn, it's honestly scary to even think about to this day. Now, the first brigade showed up and then the cops. And when the fire was put out and all the commotion had died down and some time had passed, we eventually discovered through our neighborhood watch liaison that it had been an act of arson. Someone had set the neighbor's shed on fire. Unfortunately, the neighbor had been storing a whole bunch of aerosol cans and fuel in his shed, which he really wasn't supposed to do, which had led to the fire being far more serious than was likely intended and far more dangerous. The reason that the owner hadn't fled the house was because he was actually away, staying with his son up country, and you'll be pleased to know that the cat was fine and was the first to flee. Now, I can't be sure, but I'm absolutely certain that the trio who set the fire to the hedge were also the ones who burned the shed. When they'd been walking past number 20, some of their vulgarity had been directed at the man who lived there in the house, so they clearly knew him, and there was a nearby pub which had CCTV cameras, and of course it wasn't working at the time, so nobody was identified. The arsonist or arsonists were never caught, but I know who it was. It was the drunk alcoholic smokers who recklessly threw burning cigarette butts around, and so just after our street had stopped stinking of a burning hedge, it started stinking of a burning shed. That was a fun year, with the smell of burning everything permeating our lives. At least nothing else had caught fire for nearly 2 decades now, and if it does, then I'm going to leave it up to other members of the neighborhood watch to go heroically diving into those flames. I don't recommend it, and I think I exhausted my luck when I almost caught on fire the first time. But you know, if I'm ever forced to save a cat from the flames, I can't promise I won't dive into that inferno again. I used to be part of a neighborhood watch group, and I was witness to an absolutely crazy, kind of creepy incident that sticks with me to this day. We live on a street just on the outskirts of a small town which has a higher than average crime rate. Our street itself has always been pretty lucky, avoiding being the focus of the town's worst offenders. There was the occasional attempted break-in, some power tools stolen from a few garden sheds, but that was really it. Now, that was before this spate of car vandalism. Almost every morning, we'd wake up to discover one of our cars had been keyed or the mirrors had been slashed off. Now, in a couple of cases, the badges on the front of the couple of cars had been stolen. Now, this was back when that was a lot easier to do. One of the neighbors owned a Mercedes, and I swear his badge must have been stolen 3 times over the course of a year or so, even after we put a stop to the worst of the vandalism. Now, the vandalism is what spurred us on to start taking the neighborhood watch duties seriously. We spoke to local law enforcement, asked for the best tips we could, befriended a community officer, and got a direct line to the local station. And they also agreed to send a patrol into our cul-de-sac as many nights as possible. Now, not to belittle our boys in blue, but I don't think I ever actually saw a cop patrolling our street. I guess in fairness, they did have better things to do, like preventing murders and violent stuff in the city, so it's not like I hold it against them. And that's what the neighborhood watch was for anyway. The vandalism continued though, so about 5 or 6 of us guys volunteered to take night duty until the vandal was caught. Now surely, if we spent the next night watching the small cul-de-sac, we'd catch that person or multiple people in the act. Now that's what you'd think anyway. And yet somehow, after a couple of weeks of vigilance, we didn't spot a single suspicious character. And yet the vandalism continued. It was like the culprit was spec ops or a ghost or something crazy. But what kind of spec ops soldier spends his time army crawling along the ground keying cars? I wish I could offer an explanation of who did it and how, but that was still something we never discovered. Instead, this vandalizer decided to retire himself and go out with a bang. There had been a car parked at the end of our cul-de-sac for what seemed like forever. It had clearly been abandoned there, and a number of us neighborhood watch members had stuck flyers all over the car, pleading with the owner to just move along. All the tires had deflated by this point naturally, and the paintwork was incredibly rusty. Now, we called the city council about it multiple times, but nothing was ever done. In the end, it just became sort of a staple of the street. We called the car Christine, after the Stephen King story, because it had the vague air of being haunted, or at least kind of sinister. Now one night, it was my turn on night watch, and I was just working on my laptop looking out the window when I noticed a glow coming from the end of the cul-de-sac. My house was in the middle, so I had to look around to see exactly what it was. Immediately, I realized Christine was on fire from the inside. I ran outside, careful not to get too close, and these flames were just picking up inside of Christine's seats, but I couldn't immediately see a broken window or any way that the fire could have actually been started inside the car. I called the cops on my cell phone, so I'm glad I paused to do so, because moments later, Christine exploded outward. It wasn't the kind of huge epic explosion you might see in the movies or expect from Call of Duty or something. I guess in part this was because the car had been sitting there for so long without any gas that there wasn't too much fuel to actually explode. It was enough to send pieces of shrapnel flying into the road or pieces of glass into the car parked near Christine, though, and it would certainly have been strong enough to cause me some serious damage if I'd actually approached like I had planned to. And soon the cops showed up, as did the fire department, and the vehicle's blaze was extinguished. Now, over the next few days, we learned that the fire had definitely been arson. A small hole had been drilled through the glass of one of Christine's windows, a tiny bit of accelerant had been poured through it, and then someone had fed a burning rag into the car. Now finally, the cops and the city council put up some effort into tracking Christine's owner, and this went absolutely nowhere. As it turned out, the license plate was just completely fake, registered to no vehicle on record, and the only thing they were able to trace was the engine, which belonged to a totally different, much older car that had been supposedly scrapped many years before. Now, there's no way Christine would have been able to drive at all with that engine installed, and the whole thing was just some mystery. Nobody had any idea when the car had turned up or what the purpose of all of it really was. Had the vandalism been some kind of preamble in order to burn Christine for some purpose? Some of us half expected the cops to find a charred body in the trunk, but there was nothing like that. The wreckage of the car got towed, and from that day forward, the vehicular vandalism just kind of stopped. Various other things happened with the neighborhood watch since then. I confronted a burglar, and one of my neighbors helped the cops arrest an SA offender on the run, and we successfully chased off a gang of drug dealers who'd started operating on the corner. But nothing ever came close to being as puzzling and mysterious or creepy as that series of vehicular vandalism and the mysterious Christine, the impossible car. Now, it's been nearly a decade since then, and I still think about it from time to time. At the very least, I wish I knew who had been responsible for the vandalism and how they'd been able to slip under my nose quite so successfully. But I guess some mysteries just never end up getting solved. My name's Ryan, and I'm a grad student here in NYC, and I just managed to escape from the worst roommate I've ever had. I've been a fan of the show for a while now, and I've always kind of hoped that I'd never have a reason to contribute. I thought I could just listen to everyone else's creepy stories and never experience one of my own, but I guess that all changed when I met Kurt. I won't bore you with all the ins and outs of my housing situation in September last year, but let's just say that I needed a place to stay, and I needed it badly, and so I ended up going to view a single room in a shared apartment where my roommate would be a guy called Kurt. And Kurt wasn't there during the viewing, and I'm guessing that not only was that on purpose, but the landlord had the place scrubbed down to make it look like a regular, sane person lived there. After some couch surfing, I moved in on a 6-month contract starting October 1st of last year, and when I first met Kurt, I had absolutely no measure of what a creep he was going to be. He seemed like a quiet guy, into his old-school heavy metal with his long red hair and beard, and I honestly figured the only issue might be loud music or something like that. But pretty quickly, Kurt showed his character. And the first thing, and probably the least creepy thing relative to everything else, was his music. He played bass guitar, and at first me and him were pretty cool, so I asked him what band he was into after hearing him play one day. Now, he was into much more extreme stuff, but we talked about bands like Sabbath, Zeppelin, and my personal favorite, AC/DC, for a while, and it was cool to find some shared interests. But then, Kurt asked if I wanted to listen to something he wrote. Now, I responded saying, sure, go ahead, and then he gets out his phone and starts playing this recording that's just his bass line and a drum track. It sounded pretty cool at first, like kind of creepy sounding, but still pretty good, and it kind of reminded me of Dawn Patrol by Megadeth, if you know the song. Some vocals kicked in, something kind of weird sounding I had to almost concentrate on to hear, but then I realized I wasn't hearing anyone singing. It sounded like a young woman talking, and she sounded very upset. I figured it was some kind of spoken word thing that he was working on with someone, but then, as the girl kept on talking, I realized that she was the survivor of a violent, carnal assault, and that she was recounting her experiences either in court or some kind of police tape. I said, dude, is it real? And not like a sort of, oh man, that's cool kind of way, like, what the F kind of way. But Kurt just smiled and nodded and then started telling me about the exact crime it was from and things like that. I didn't say it to his face, but I thought using that audio was in very, very poor taste. But like I said, I didn't want to start an argument or cause any tension, and so I just palmed him off with something like, good art is always provocative, I guess, and then turned our talk onto something else. I only had to live with the guy, and I didn't think his weird taste in tunes meant that he was a serial killer or anything like that, but then I guess in that department, the thing he did next did him no favors. So I come home, I'm hungry, I open the fridge, and there's a bunch of what looks like organ meats in unlabeled jars, and the whole fridge stinks like vinegar. I felt like his stepdad or something going up to his room and asking him, like, "Hey, buddy, what's that you left in the refrigerator there? It's awfully stinky for shared food storage, don't you think?" Now Kurt's just sitting there, blasted out of his skull and listening to the Melvins, and while yes, the Melvins rule, they don't pair well with pickled organ meats. Kurt apologized, told me they were sort of not-so-live models for an art project that he was working on, and said that he'd have them out of the fridge by the end of the week. Again, this wasn't so bad because while it wasn't nice looking at a shriveled-up pig's heart every time I grabbed some creamer, it wasn't affecting my quality of life or anything like that. But then, come the end of the week, the way Kurt chose to dispose of those organs pushed things to a whole other level. I woke up to take a leak at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to be up at 6:30, so I'm pissed that I'm actually losing out on sleep. I hit the upstairs hallway in my boxers, breathing through my nose, all half asleep, and then, bam, this smell like sour death just punches me in the nose. I can hear frying coming from downstairs, and so I kind of knew what Kurt was doing before I saw it. But I went down anyway to make sure, and when I saw him frying those pickled organs in a goddamn pan, I said, "Dude, what the actual F are you doing right now?" Again, Kurt was all apologies like he always was. I promise that's not a Nirvana reference, but that time I was actually pissed off. Because once I went back up to bed, all I could smell was that sour death smell after it had gotten into my room. I couldn't go back to sleep at all. Like half because of the smell and half because of how mad I was that he'd try and cook that crap at 4 in the goddamn morning. It made him sick too, like he pretty much occupied the bathroom for the next 48 hours, meaning that I was relegated to peeing in bottles whenever he was camped out in there or whenever I was too scared to witness the aftermath. And that kind of knocked the pep out of him for a while, I suppose, because there was no more weird behavior out of Kurt, at least none I could see. Now the next thing happened maybe 2 or 3 weeks later when I came home to find a piece of meat hanging from some string he had tied to a cabinet handle, just sort of hanging there over the workspace. It didn't have a hook going through it like you might be imagining. It was sort of all wrapped up and tied in a string, but then the string had little tiny pieces of metal hooked on them, and so the meat looked like it had maybe 4 or 5 of these little metal tags on it. Each tag had weird little symbols on it that was different to the others. Now right away I'm thinking, Kurt, what the hell, man? And while I wanted to just toss it because it was a freaking dripping onto the counter, I just wrapped it up in plastic and put it in the fridge for him. Kurt comes home asking why I moved his meat and then asked me not to do it again because he was curing it. I asked him if he put any salt on it, like fully knowing that he didn't because I saw it, and when he said no, I said he needed to put a lot of salt on it if he wanted to cure it. Now he says, "Oh, okay, thanks." And then when I visit the kitchen, there it is again. No salt, no rub, no nothing. It's just there. I looked up how to cure meat, and what I read says you actually do gotta put it in the fridge while it's salted, and so at that point I'm thinking, okay, why the hell is he lying to me? I didn't want to argue with him. I like the quiet life, you know? And so instead of actually telling him what a disgusting creep he was being with his little Hellraiser ornament, I very politely suggested that he keep his meat in his bedroom so he wasn't making the kitchen unsanitary. I also added that he was going to make it a safety issue. I had no choice but to contact the landlord. I wasn't a dick about it. It was more like, just work with me, dude. and since he wasn't a total a-hole, Kurt agreed to do just that and keep his meat in his room. The final straw was when the smell of rotten meat started seeping out from under his bedroom door, and then it wasn't long before I noticed an uptick of flies in our apartment. I got in touch with the landlord and asked him to perform some kind of apartment inspection so he could personally tell Kurt to stop just letting raw meat rot in his bedroom. He said he was busy for a couple of days and he would be over the first chance he got. But before then, I realized why the apartment was starting to smell worse and worse. It wasn't just seeping out from Kurt's door. He was hiding pieces of it around the apartment and letting it rot. He didn't get violent or yell at me when I confronted him about it. He gave me some evil-looking death stare, but he didn't say anything. He just slammed his bedroom door in my face, told me he didn't want to talk to me anymore, and at that I called the landlord again and told him not to bother coming over, or at least not on my behalf anyways, because I wanted out. I still had to pay him a month's rent at the start of this month, but I honestly thought it was worth it just to get away from Kurt in that apartment. I think he's a scumbag because I figured that he deliberately hid Kurt's character from me, who, by the way, was having his rent paid by his goddamn parents. I also used to wonder how he could afford to live there without any discernible source of income, but on the way out, the landlord mentioned it and it all suddenly made sense. The same landlord actually offered me an alternative place to stay, but there was no way in hell that I was about to trust him again. Not after he basically tricked me into living with a freak like Kurt. So let me tell you a story about how the best living situation I ever had turned into the worst living situation I ever had, and why there's never been a truer statement than never judge a book by its cover. So many moons ago now, I was looking for places to live in the city I'm at when I came across this pretty amazing apartment while going through the listings. The decor is awesome, it's all furnished, and it was maybe 15 minutes walk away from my job too, so literally perfect in almost every possible way. The only drawback was that it was a shared apartment. Now, I wasn't completely averse to living with someone, but I also knew that if there was a clash of personalities or something like that, then things could get pretty tense pretty quick. I'd previously lived with a guy, I'm a guy myself by the way, who could only be safely described on YouTube as a Neolithic savage, because if I go into any detail I'll probably get this video flagged if you actually read it. Now my point is, I knew that there was no point in me living in that place if the roomie was going to be difficult, and so I asked the landlord if I could meet him during the viewing, and that is how I met Todd. And Todd seemed like the dream roommate, honestly. He said he worked a lot and that he liked going to the gym and all of that in his spare time, but when he said that he'd be out of the apartment a lot, he wasn't kidding. I had the whole place to myself pretty much all day, every day, and the only times that I'd catch him chilling on the couch was when the game was on or when he had an injury or something like that. But even when he was home, I was stoked to have him around. He was a funny guy, he was clean, and he was chill too, so generally nice and easy to live with. But then came the night when everything changed. So the place had these 2 big bedrooms, these ensuite bathrooms, the works. Mine had a lock on the door too, but I didn't think that I'd need it, you know? Todd was a respectful and mature enough person to knock before entering and whatnot, so while I briefly considered using the lock, in the end I was sort of thinking, why bother? Now anyways, I've been living there for just over a month with absolutely 0 complaints all around, and the whole time, Todd was the ideal roomie. But then one night, I woke up needing to pee in the middle of the night like usual, and when I rolled over in bed, all I could see was this dark figure standing by the open doorway. And I freaking screamed so loud. I pretty much dived backwards off the bed, still screaming at the top of my lungs. Then by the time I grabbed the little folding knife I kept in the drawer, Todd had switched on the light. It was him, standing there in his underwear, but as weird as it might sound, he was just as surprised as I was. You see, Todd wasn't aware that he'd got up out of bed and walked into my bedroom because he'd been sleepwalking. Now, I said he probably should have just told me that once I'd moved in, but as it turned out, Todd hadn't done any sleepwalking for years. He said he used to do it a bunch when he was a kid, especially after he and his family moved house one time, and he figured it was probably the change of me moving in having triggered it or something, and said that he'd never had neglected to mention if he'd been actively sleepwalking. I just wanted to get to sleep, honestly, so I just told him everything was fine and then went back to bed. Now, the next morning, I texted him to say basically, "Hey, sorry if that was weird, and I'm sorry about your condition coming back. I hope everything's okay." He told me we were good, but that maybe I should start locking my door in the future. I texted him back saying, "Sure thing, Captain Obvious," with maybe a laughing emoji, and then we were pals again. Now, from then on, I started locking my door at night, but it also wasn't like Todd wasn't doing anything about it. He said he went to some doctor who gave him a prescription for mild sleeping pills, and then for about a week or so, there was nothing. And then one night, I'm asleep in bed and I hear bang, 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 bang on my bedroom door. Now, once again, I'm just about jumping out of bed, but since Todd's knocking, I figured that he must be awake, so I asked him what's up. But I get zero response. I knew he must have been sleepwalking, so I called out to him to say, Hey, wake up! All that kind of stuff, but again, I got no reply. I got up out of bed thinking, please don't make this a regular thing. And then when I opened up the door, there's Todd, buck naked, with his eyes all rolled up in their sockets so all I could see was the whites. I yelled something, slammed the door, and I think that's what woke him up, because the next thing I hear is him saying sorry and then running back to his room, still apologizing. I didn't follow him. I was mad, but what the hell could I do? The guy had some serious condition. It wasn't really his fault. And so I went back to sleep, went to work the next morning, and then called Todd at lunch to see how he was doing. He kept apologizing for waking me up, but I made it clear that as long as he was seeking help, then it was fine, because sooner or later the issue would be resolved, and that's aside from the fact that he couldn't really help it. He was super grateful, which was fine, because what choice did I have other than to work with him? And then again, that same sort of pattern played itself out. He went to the doctor, got more powerful sleeping pills, and even started hammering cardio at the gym after work to really tire himself out, you know? And there were another couple of weeks without incidents, and then once again, I woke up to Todd banging on my door in the middle of the night. I was just getting so tired of it by then. Almost every time we thought he'd handled it, it came back all over again. I started to suspect that he might not be sleepwalking, and that this was sort of like a weird way of trying to force me out. But I guess that was my paranoia and exhaustion talking because, well, I guess you'll soon see. And so he bangs on my door, wakes me up, and I start telling him to wake up and go back to bed. I put my head back down on the pillow, and he didn't knock again, but I also didn't hear him wake up or walk back to his room, so I got up, walked to the door, and started listening out for him. I figured that he might have maybe quickly walked off to another part of the house, but I also didn't want to just open my door up just in case he was standing there naked again. And so as I said, I listened, and what I heard sent a chill run through me. Todd was standing on the other side of the door, all right, and I knew that, because he was whispering something. I knew it was just his unconscious brain working, and that what he was saying probably didn't mean a thing, but just hearing him whispering on the other side of the door gave me the creeps, big time. I ended up waking him up by banging on the door back at him, and it sucked to hear him get scared and frightened, but at least it let me know that he was for real. I started questioning why him knocking on my door didn't wake him up, but me knocking back at him did. But I guess it was sort of like the outside stimulus throwing him off his sleep rhythm or something, because, like I said, I don't suspect him of faking this anymore. Now anyway, the final time it happened, before I started to consider just leaving at the end of that month, I recorded it to show Todd that next morning, and I guess just so he could see things from my perspective. Now, he started hammering on my door again, and I tried waking him up by banging back, but for some reason that didn't work, and he started whispering again. Now, I banged a second time, thinking another round of knocking back might do the trick, But all that did was make Todd start speaking louder, and it was then that I heard what he was saying for the first time, and it was almost like a prayer, but all kinds of jumbled. There was a lot of, "Our Heavenly Father, Lord, hallowed be thy name," but none of it actually went anywhere. It was all these phrases just sort of looping and spiraling until it sounded almost like nonsense talk, just like an edge of reason to it. Now, he spoke in this weird voice too, like in the back of his throat almost, and I honestly think that it was one of the single creepiest things I've ever heard in my life. If I just woke up to that on the first night it happened, then I'd have been even more spooked than when Todd just appeared in my room. But since I kind of knew what was happening, I just went back to bed with a pillow wrapped around my head and tried to get some sleep. Now, the next morning before I left for work, I showed him the video I took the previous night. It obviously didn't show much of him, but it captured all the creepy-sounding nonsensical prayers that he recited in the back of his throat voice of his. I massively regret showing him that video, and I didn't do it to be mean or anything like that. I just needed him to see how serious it was and how bad he was disturbing my sleep. But oh man, the second he heard himself, it was like the stuffing had been knocked out of him. He went quiet. He said sorry, and then after telling him I'd see him later and we could talk about it after work, I figured that he'd head out the door like he usually did. Only he didn't. He just sat down at the kitchen table and he started to cry. Now, later that day, I got a text from Todd saying that he was checking himself into some kind of medical facility and that he might not be back for a month or two, maybe more. I had the apartment all to myself for a while, which was nice in a way, but I was really worried about Todd. We kept in touch, and I'd ask him how his treatment was going and all of that, but he'd always give me one-word answers and then change the subject like he didn't want to talk about it. Now, I remember thinking it probably wasn't going well since he didn't want to talk about it much, and then after 2 months, Todd told me that he wouldn't be moving back to live with me, and he'd be sending someone over to gather his stuff. It was sad, knowing this super capable guy was having such trouble with a medical condition. I mean, it was creepy as hell being in the middle of all of that, and I think it'd have been a hell of a lot more frightening if I didn't know what was going on. But I did, and there was a rational explanation for it. It just sucked it was happening to him, and I lost his number after losing my phone, so these days I can't reach out to see how he's doing. So Todd, buddy, if you just so happen to be listening to this somehow, I hope you're doing much better, and I still think about you from time to time.
In May of 2014, a crime in Waukesha, Wisconsin, became one of the most chilling examples of internet fiction bleeding off into reality. 3 12-year-old girls had become deeply immersed in online creepypasta culture, especially the fictional character of Slender Man. Born from the internet forums and amplified through YouTube, Reddit, and other various horror sites, Slender Man had become more than just a scary story to them. To these girls, he was real. In reality, Slender Man had been born on an image board, some say 4chan, in hopes of winning a contest for scariest picture. Slender Man was simply just a creepy Photoshop job of a man in a suit at a park, chasing kids around a playground with his infamously long arms. The rest of his mythos was simply a reaction to that original image. Like many others, they spent months reading lore, watching videos, sharing theories online. Over time, the line between fiction and belief eroded, though. They began to convince themselves that Slender Man existed as a real supernatural entity, and he was watching them, influencing them, calling them to his cause. According to police interviews, the girls believed they needed to commit a murder to become Slender Man's proxies and to prove their loyalty. They also believed that if they didn't comply, Slender Man would kill all of their families. Their only chance at survival was sacrificing one of their own and becoming pawns for this entity. They lured their friend into the woods under the guise of playing, then stabbed her 19 times and left her for dead. Miraculously, though, the victim would survive. The case would horrify the public, but it also became a landmark moment in online culture, showing how internet mythology, when mixed with youth, obsession, and isolation, could become real enough to inspire real-world violence, even murder. Just a few weeks after the Slender Man stabbing, another internet-fueled tragedy would unfold, this time rooted not in fictional lore but in a toxic online identity. In June of 2014, Elliot Rodger carried out a mass killing in Isla Vista, California, murdering 6 people and injuring 14 others before taking his own life. Before the attack, Rodger left behind a manifesto and a series of YouTube videos that revealed how deeply he had been immersed in online incel, involuntary celibate, communities. These were spaces where anger, misogyny, and grievance were reinforced through constant online validation. On Reddit-adjacent forums and similar platforms, Rodger absorbed a worldview that framed women and society as enemies, and himself a victim of a rigged system. His writings echoed talking points and narratives common inside these online spaces: entitlement, resentment, and a belief that violence was actually justified. That perhaps violence was in fact the key to making all of this go away. Elliot believed that if he could showcase his fury, perhaps he could scare women into never telling a man no ever again. After the attack, his manifesto and videos were circulated, analyzed, and in some dark corners of the internet, even praised. Reddit threads would dissect his ideology in real time. Some condemned it, others archived it. In fringe spaces, he actually became a symbol. The chilling part really isn't what he did. It's how an online grievance culture gave him a script, a community, a framework that helped turn his resentment into death itself. Rodger wasn't frequent on Reddit, but he posted his manifesto, serial killer style, videos almost everywhere, and many different communities analyzed them. Users on bodybuilding.com, where Elliot Rodger was a regular visitor, actually commented on Elliot's creepy, serial killer-like qualities just a week before his actual rampage. Reddit, though, was the rabbit hole. You could find almost anything available on the kid, as well as multitudes of commentary and speculation. They pulled apart every post, every second of footage, and built a profile of Elliot that rivaled that of law enforcement. In the late 2010s, a disturbing online phenomenon began to circulate through Reddit, YouTube, and social media, the so-called Blue Whale Challenge. The story claimed that children were being contacted online by an anonymous curator who would assign them a series of escalating dares over several weeks. The tasks allegedly started small, waking up at odd hours, watching disturbing videos, and gradually escalating into self-harm, with the final challenge being suicide. Journalists and investigators later found little evidence of a centralized, organized game. But here's the actual disturbing part. The panic itself was relentless. Schools, parents, politicians, the whole world was addressing this in real time. Reddit threads, warning posts, news segments, and a viral video spread the legend so wildly that kids began reenacting the behavior even without a real organizer. The kids became their own curators. Schools would issue alerts. Police departments released public warnings. Parents reported children carving symbols into their arms, mimicking what they'd seen online. In multiple cases, families directly linked suicide attempts and self-harm to exposure to the blue whale content. Now, whether the challenge existed as advertised almost didn't really matter. The kids had now taken over. The internet had created something far more dangerous, a viral horror narrative that kids believed was actually real. The fear, the dares, the mythology became a kind of digital urban legend that encouraged real-world harm through imitation and psychological pressure, even if they were just pretending. Following all of this, a new kind of internet-driven danger had become disturbingly common: viral challenge culture. Across Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, and other platforms, dangerous dares would spread like HPV inside an army barracks. What started off as jokes or shock content quickly would become trends, and then expectations. Kids were doing things we couldn't even imagine. Some of the most notorious included the Skullbreaker Challenge, where people would kick someone's legs out from underneath them mid-jump. The Benadryl Challenge, encouraging teens to take dangerous doses to hallucinate. The Blackout Challenge, which involved cutting off oxygen to induce passing out. The Fire Challenge, where participants set parts of their body on fire. Reddit threads are filled with warning posts, hospital stories, grieving family members trying to understand how something so obviously dangerous would become normalized. In multiple documented cases, teens would die or suffer permanent brain damage trying to complete any of these challenges. What makes this category so disturbing isn't really just the recklessness, it's the psychology. Online dangerous behavior is rewarded with views, likes, and attention. Algorithms push extreme content. Peer pressure is amplified by visibility. What would have been dismissed as a stupid idea becomes a trend, and then a rite of passage. It becomes addicting when those views hit. It's the same pattern as the earlier cases. The internet doesn't just suggest behavior, it normalizes it. It gamifies it. It dares people to bring it into the real world. I suffer from autism, social anxiety, PTSD, and severe anger issues. At school, I'm usually mocked by other people for being the weird white kid. I get called a school shooter a lot because I had a really unhealthy obsession with the Columbine massacre. People laughed when they said it, like it was a joke, like it couldn't possibly land them anywhere dangerous. Teachers overheard it sometimes and didn't even intervene. After a while, I stopped correcting anybody. When you hear something enough, it starts to feel assigned to you, like a role in a family. It was just the space that I seemed to be filling. I was 16 at the time, living in a small country with strict firearm laws, but access still existed. I was already unraveling. My best friend, the person who used to pull me back when my thoughts got extremely violent, started to ghost me, only reaching out when he needed money or some kind of favor. My ex-girlfriend had just broken up with me, and my social anxiety had hardened into something like a callus inside my mind. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was bitter. I was humiliated. I felt like everybody around me had a script for life, and I was improvising. Anything that went well for a peer or a neighbor would infuriate me. I wanted to set fire to anything positive, anything successful. I got dumped the night before because she liked another guy, a guy I knew pretty well. The details sound small when I write it all out, but at the time, it felt like proof that I was in fact replaceable. How else could I feel? That morning at school on August 25th, 2018, everything felt hostile. The hallways were suffocating. Every laugh felt directed. Kids were picking on me, threatening me, laughing at me. And I remember thinking how inescapable this all was. Like this was just what my life was now, forever and ever. I carried a journal everywhere with me. It was messy, angry, mostly incoherent babblings on violence. Writing was the only way I could slow down my thoughts. But on this day, the writing didn't slow down anything, it actually accelerated it. I felt this overwhelming surge of rage mixed with suicidal thoughts, like two currents feeding into one another. I started writing about hurting the school, not dramatically, not emotionally, just line after line, detached, almost clinical. That's what scares me now. There was no panic, no adrenaline, just a sense of momentum. Everything felt natural and fine in the moment. I walked out of class in the hallway. I passed a friend and told him, "Dude, go home." He asked me why, and I told him that I'm gonna do something. You should get the fuck out of here. I still replay that moment over and over, how casually it came out of my mouth, like I was warning somebody about bad weather before a storm would roll in. And I guess I was the storm, a black cloud of hatred that was about to punish everything around me. I messaged my ex, told her to forget about me. She knew I'd had these thoughts since I was young. She panicked immediately, called me over and over, trying to ground me in the moment, telling me to breathe, asking where I was. I was almost outside when everything collapsed on me. I saw it all at once. The permanence, the headlines, the families, the fact that I wouldn't be just ending my life, but poisoning other people's forever. I called the mental health clinic, asked for my psychologist, told them everything about what was almost about to happen. Saying it out loud shattered that illusion that I was in control, and soon I was weeping, hyperventilating, on the edge of delirium. It was hands down the most terrifying experience of my life, not because of the chaos, but because I learned how thin the line really was, how easy it was to drift towards something irreversible without realizing you crossed a point of no return. I was committed fully to ending any and everybody that had ever caused me grief. There was nothing that would stop me inside my mind. I'm actually in a healthy relationship now. I cut my old best friend out of my life, let him know the damage that he caused me, which was very relieving. I'm still on good terms with my ex. Therapy forced me to confront things that I buried: bullying, resentment, the way anger had become a buffer between me and reality. I even transferred to a school for students with mental health issues for a while, just to slow everything down and reset. The country I live in now is very considerate when it comes to mental health services. I've told a few close friends. I've told my mom and my older brother. And every time I say it, it feels unreal now, like I'm talking about somebody else. But it wasn't somebody else. It was me. It was me that almost murdered students in every classroom. Me that nearly secured a firearm and pumped round after round into innocent casualty. I can hardly stomach the thought now. Update. I didn't make this Reddit post for praise. I expect judgment. I'm posting it because this almost destroyed everything, and because it didn't have to. I got help. I'm still getting help. My anxiety is lower. My anger isn't consuming me any longer. I haven't had serious thoughts like that since. If you're hearing this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, there is another way. Please reach out for help before a moment becomes a legacy that you can't escape. When I was 12, I learned something about the local woodland. My best friend Alex's father had bought this huge stretch of forest about an hour outside of Montreal. It had been nothing but trees when they acquired it. They cleared a small patch for a house and left the rest untouched. A dirt road cut through the property, running for several kilometers before reaching a few scattered homes that were further up. The road divided into two completely different worlds. On the right side, the side with the house, the forest was open, golden, rolling hills, deciduous trees that let sunlight spill through them. It felt breathable, friendly, safe enough for kids to wander, dogs without a leash. It felt like home. On the left side, there was a ditch about 2 meters deep running parallel to the road. The ditch was strange, filled with rusted car parts, wheels, doors, steering columns, moss covered and half buried like relics from some mechanical graveyard. Beyond the ditch rose this steep hill, thick with dark conifers. The trunks were nearly black, the canopy swallowed all of the light. And at the top of that hill was a swamp ground. We called it Demon Forest. And it's not a joke, not really. We all felt it, a pressure change, a subtle animal instinct that said, don't go up there, don't stay long if you do, leave, go back to the road. We rarely climbed up that hill. One autumn afternoon in 2001 or 2002, my family was visiting Alex's. We got bored listening to adults talk and decided to walk the dirt road. Alex's father warned us before we left. Something had been getting into their trash. He thought it was a large dog that belonged to somebody further up the road. He said it looked horrific, diseased, patches of fur were missing, not healthy. If we saw it, don't approach it. It was overcast but calm. The air was still in that heavy pre-winter way. Fallen leaves carpeted everything in golden red. We walked uphill with the bright forest to our right and the demon forest to our left, shoes crunching with every single step. That uneasy feeling crept in further as we climbed, and about halfway up the slope, I saw something that stopped me. A large pine branch extended over the road from the dark hillside, and tied to it was this pink ribbon. Now, that alone did not make sense. Nobody else lived directly on that land, and there were no little girls. No reason for something delicate and bright to be hanging from a tree deep inside a private forest. What made it worse was that ribbon was whipping violently in the air. It flapped almost horizontal, and there was no wind. The trees were still. The leaves on the ground weren't moving. My hair wasn't moving. I licked my finger and held it up the way my dad had taught me to. Got nothing. But that ribbon snapped and fluttered as it caught steady in a gust. I reached up and touched it. It moved strangely against my fingers, and for some reason, I couldn't even speak. I wanted to talk about it, ask about it, but the words wouldn't come to me. Alex, on the other hand, didn't seem to care. He was distracted, scanning the hill. I didn't push it, and we just kept walking. Eventually, the steep hill softened into a clearing, a half-circle slope carved away from the trees. It felt theatrical, as if we stood on a stage and the forest above us was an audience, looking down on what we might do. The ground between us and the tree line was open, covered only in fallen leaves, no brush, no shrubs, clear visibility all the way to the top. Alex froze next to me. Did you hear that? he asked. I hadn't. He said there were wildcats in the forest. His dad had seen them. One had kittens. He was suddenly thrilled by that idea, and he insisted we heard a meow from up there. I told him again that I didn't hear anything, but before I could stop him, he cupped his hands, meowing loudly toward the trees. The forest answered him back. A clear, deliberate meow, not an echo. It wasn't distorted, clear as daylight. Alex lit up immediately and did it again. And again, the woods responded back to him. Every time he meowed, something above us would meow back. Exactly once in response, every time, a perfect mirror. Even at 12 years old, I knew animals don't behave like that. Wildcats don't conduct conversations with children, and there was no echo in that space. The leaves and soil would have swallowed it, and yet there it was, this touch of feedback, a distortion, and it continued to answer. Then out of nowhere, the leaves up the hill began to rustle. Something was moving toward us. The sound was heavy, whatever it was huge, heavy, two-legged, crunching through the leaves without any kind of hesitation, without any care for being heard. And yet, there was nothing there. We could see the entire slope between us and that tree line. Nothing was moving. Nothing broke the surface of leaves, no shape, no shadow, but the rustling multiplied. Alex grinned over at me. The kittens are coming. It sounds like a whole litter. My eyes went wide and shaky. I felt like Alex wasn't Alex anymore. What he was saying, there just wasn't any logic to it. There's now several distinct sets of movements, closing in, fanning out. Still nothing visible. Alex continued to smile, clasping his hands together in anticipation. Panic began to start in my stomach, though, and climbed up into my throat. The clearing felt exposed. We were out in the open, no quick exit, standing in an open space with invisible movement surrounding us. I heard it then, loud, wet panting, right at my feet. For a split second, my brain tried to normalize it. I had a husky at home. I knew that sound. But then reality slammed back in me. There was no dog there, yet the panting was inches from my leg. I looked down. Nothing. But my brain understood there should be something in my field of vision, right? In that moment, my entire consciousness fizzled and popped. I short-circuited. The panting continued, heavy, close, as if a large dog stood pressed up against my shins. I spun in a full circle, screaming, but there was nothing. No animal, no movement, no shadows. The clearing was completely empty. Yet the panting did not stop. I looked up the road. About 100 meters away, at the crest of the hill, stood this lone dog. Large, broad-headed. Something like a Rottweiler, but zombified. Fur was patchy, missing in spots. Skin was visible, but dirty, unkempt. Open, festering wounds here and there. It was staring right at us. There's no possible way I could hear that dog breathing from that distance, though. But the panting at my feet was unmistakable. That was the moment that instinct kind of just took over. I ran, faster than I ever had before in my life, and Alex was beside me. We didn't look back. We tore down the hill and to the house came back into view. We never walked that road again. We told his dad that we saw the dog, and he went and paraded around with a rifle for a bit, but didn't see any sign of it. We called it a day and spent the rest of it inside. Years later, I still went to Alex's house. We partied there as teenagers, drank too much, smoked too much, stayed up late. But stepping outside at night just always felt spooky still. The forest was aware of us. When I slept over, I sometimes woke up in that half-conscious state, feeling something in the room. Once I swore that I saw something near the ceiling, a shape that wasn't a shape, just pooled up like a liquid darkness. We never talked about that day either, not once. As an adult, I looked into the history of the land. It sits on a territory traditionally inhabited by Algonquin peoples, possibly Mohawk depending on the boundary lines. The knowledge doesn't really explain what happened though, the ribbon, the mimicry, the energy, but I do know this. Something in that forest responded when we called, and whatever draws breath out there apparently doesn't need a body to do it. Our house sat alone on a rise of land just outside a small railroad town. That kind of place that felt stuck in time, like it was out of a Steinbeck novel. You could step onto the porch at night and hear nothing but wind moving through the grass and the low distant hum of the freight cars rolling from miles away. The property sloped gently down on all sides, flattening into wide fields and thin strips of woodland that seemed to stretch on and on forever. There were no close neighbors, no streetlights, no nearby traffic. At night, the dark pooled around our property as if it had somewhere else to go. Inside, things were ordinary, quiet, comfortable. This wasn't a place that we were afraid of during the day. It was super normal. It may have been very isolated, but that didn't give us any reason to be scared of anything out there. And that was true for most of my childhood. This wasn't the first house that I can remember, but it's the one that we spent the most time in. My parents had bought it when my brother and I were still in elementary school, the property that they always dreamed of, and it was closer to the big job opportunity that my dad had. They made the purchase and we got moved in. Dad immediately started going to work. My brother and I were quick to explore when we weren't at school, and my mom made the place very beautiful. They bought the house from a man that lived alone. I don't remember specifically a lot about that guy, but I remember meeting him once or twice. He seemed nice, normal-looking guy, thin hair, thin frame, polo shirt and slacks. He said he was cashing in on the real estate market and also moving for some kind of job opportunity himself. He spent some time showing them upgrades he'd made to the house while they went through the motions of the deal, and this was mostly a private sell. And then one day, the house was ours, and I never saw that previous owner again. He was packed up and moved on, living his new life. I vaguely remember him not having a lot of stuff, or maybe he'd already moved most of it. Things were incredibly normal the entire time during the deal and after. No scary animals in the yard, no ghost inside the house. Our new lives began to unfurl. Every so often, my mother would mention something strange that she'd heard after we all were in bed, though. She described it as this dull metallic knocking, slow, rhythmic, and hollow. Not loud or frantic or anything, just this steady, irregular sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the bedroom, beneath the house itself. She said she heard it most in the morning, just after Dad left for work, and when we were still sleeping before school. She said she could also hear it around midday, sometimes when she was home alone. She, like anyone else, would assume it was the plumbing, maybe an old pipe shifting, perhaps the furnace cycling on and off. Houses make noises, you know, especially at odd hours. They settle, breathe, adjust to the weather outside. They expand and contract with the temperature changing. It's wood and metal groaning, nothing more. But this didn't sound anything like that. It wasn't a bang or a knocking pipe. It wasn't a creak or a groan. This was the unmistakable sound of metal striking metal, and it was well below the house. It wasn't something she heard beneath the flooring when she was laying in bed, head pressed to the pillow. It sounded like it was escaping from the center of the earth. Again and again, she told herself it was nothing, told herself it had to be something mechanical, perhaps even an echo from the distant train tracks, reverbing through an underground chasm. Eventually, after enough nights of listening to it, she taught herself to just ignore it. For that entire first year, she was the only one who ever mentioned hearing anything of the sort. My brother and I were hard sleepers, the way young kids do. Our rooms were on the opposite side of the house, and whatever lived below my parents' room never seemed to wander too far. If it made noise anywhere else, we would have noticed. The nights passed, the seasons changed, the knocking faded into a story that she would only occasionally bring up, half joking and half unsettled. Until the night that I actually ended up hearing it myself. I was older then, old enough to stay up late on my own and keep my own curiosities. The house was dead silent, no television, no taps on, no other machines running, not even a touch of wind beyond the exterior of the house. It was unmistakable inside that kind of vacuum. It was faint at first, so faint that I would almost dismiss it any other time. A dull, distant talk. I held my breath, reminded immediately of every story, every other sound my mother had described. This was exactly what she'd been talking about. A second knock would follow, slightly louder, hollow yet flat at the same time, and it continued on. The sound came from beneath the floor, not from the basement, not from the crawl space. It felt deeper than that, as though it were coming from the very crust of the earth. I lay there frozen, pulse thudding in my ears, waiting for a mole man to explode through the floor of my bedroom. Another knock came, then another, each spaced far enough apart that I found myself counting the seconds between them. 10, 12, 15. It reminded me of some kind of pipe work, like there was a plumber working on something well below the foundation of the house. I got out of bed and padded down the hall to my mother's room. I didn't knock, just pushed the door open and stood there in the dark until they began to stir. "I hear it," I whispered, and both my parents sat up slowly listening themselves. And so we all lay there together for nearly an hour, nobody speaking, just counting those soft, patient taps rising up from beneath the house. There were other sounds too, and my mom casually explained each one. A line of identical taps. She would nod. "I used to hear that one a lot. Bang, bang, bang. Slow and metered out." She would nod again. "That's the most common one I hear." A different sound, like something being stretched or open, but still the sound of metal. She described it as tearing. She said she heard that one the most least often, almost never over the last couple of years. After that night, we didn't joke about it anymore. Dad was ready to call the cops, but he didn't know what to tell them. We also began to notice other things over the next couple of months. We did in fact think the house was haunted. Footsteps sometimes, slow creepy pacing that echoed faintly up through the floorboards, far away and distant, never close enough to pinpoint or to follow. A soft slide of something shifting against the wood, like something being rolled up. A dry cough that didn't belong to anybody inside the house. Sometimes even a sneeze, sharp and sudden, clean cut through the stillness of the night. Each time, whoever heard it assumed it was somebody else. My brother would think it was me. I thought it was my parents. My parents would assume it was one of us. It wasn't until we began hearing things while completely alone that pieces started to rearrange themselves. I distinctly remember being home alone, no question about it, when I heard that same metal clanging, followed by a pause, then a grunt, then more clanging. My parents were gone. My brother was out riding his bike, and yet it sounded like there was somebody hard at work just beneath my feet. One afternoon, my mother was home by herself, holding the laundry in the living room. The house was quiet, the air was heavy with heat, and she bent down to gather up and pile some clothes. She heard footsteps cross the office floor above her, slow and careful steps, navigating the interior of the home. She called my name. She got no answer. She called my brother's name. Still nothing. She stood there listening as the footsteps moved down the hallway, paused, and then faded away. That evening when she told us about it, everybody was dead quiet. We'd been waiting for something like this to happen. My brother and I had both been at school. My father was at work. And she knew that, but wanted us all to be aware that there may in fact be somebody coming in and out of our house. Dad wanted to call the police again. My mother actually agreed. And she said that she in fact would have had she actually seen a person in the house at the time. Until they actually had evidence of some kind, calling the cops would just make them look crazy. That was the first time we admitted out loud that there was something truly bizarre happening inside our home. No more delusions about train echoes through the underground cave networks. There was something going on that had some form of an explanation. Something that was more than likely human. Once that idea took root, the house seemed to go dormant, as though whatever lived beneath us finally realized that it was in fact being heard. By that afternoon, we were banging pots and pans all over the vents, playing loud music, yelling at the top of our lungs that whoever was making noise had to stop. Otherwise, this would be the new normal. We decided to fight fire with fire. The changes came slowly and they were not to our liking. A cabinet door was left open when nobody remembered using it. Shoes shifted from the mudroom to the hallway. A dining chair pulled back at an odd angle, as if somebody had stood up quietly and then forgot to push it in. The fucked up part, it was honestly most likely us. We were suddenly hypercritical of our own lifestyle and behavior, and any little stray observation must have been the phantom that was haunting us, right? It wasn't dramatic, none of it was enough to cause alarm on its own, but it happened often enough that we began to second guess ourselves. We stopped asking what happened and would begin asking who did it. At night, the sounds would return with new variety. The knocking still came from below, but it was no longer followed in any kind of pattern. Sometimes it came in clusters, 2 or 3 dull taps in quick succession. Other times it sounded like something striking the underside of the house, then sliding away, metal scraping with every movement. Footsteps would follow, traveling distances that didn't quite line up with the layout of the house. Lying awake in the dark, I began to recognize the difference between ordinary house noises and the other stuff. It was actually very easy to differentiate. Once, I never told my parents this. I heard a voice, talking, words faintly trickling out from somewhere. It stopped and then I never heard it again. After that, sleep would become very inconsistent for me. I remember thinking our house was poised over this portal to hell, and I thought I was hearing the devil himself. We began comparing notes every single day. My mother asked if anybody had been awake late. My brother asked if somebody had come home early. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. My father dismissed it all. We needed somebody to really investigate. He worked long hours and slept deeply. Whatever was happening affected him the least. And this only made the house feel divided. Just before sunrise one morning, I awoke to the sound of movement outside my window. Not the wind, not an animal, but that same metered steps that I'd heard before from under the house. Fog lay thick across the field, low and unmoving. At the edge of the tree line, where the land dipped into shadow, I saw a man standing still facing the house. He was tall and narrow, his posture slouched, as if tired or injured. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of him against the gray morning light. I stayed perfectly still, gripped by that sudden certainty that if I moved, he would notice me through that window. After a long moment, he turned and walked into the woods, disappearing smoothly. And of course, I thought maybe I was seeing things. It was early, foggy, shadowy. It was possible I was seeing some kind of trick of the light. By the time I woke my mother and pulled her to the window, the fog had thinned and the tree line now stood empty. She didn't tell me I imagined it. She looked spooked herself, ready to load us up and leave the property if needed. Later that day, my brother would admit that he'd seen somebody on the property as well, early in the morning. He hadn't said anything at the time and assumed it was a hunter or somebody just cutting through our land. After that, we did not feel as isolated. My dad actually did make a call to the police. They looked around the edge of the property and didn't find much, even poked around the footings of the house. They said they'd come back if we called, but for now, there was nothing that told them there was a person bothering us or loitering, trespassing, whatever. The sounds inside the house did not stop, but they were different. The knocking came from new places, the footsteps crossed beneath rooms they never had before. One night, my mother heard a sneeze directly below her bed, wet and restrained, like somebody doing everything they could to stay quiet. Of course, we checked the next morning. The basement, the crawl space, exterior vents, the yard, nothing disturbed. No footprints, no signs of entry. Dad had the cops come out once again and they went through the same motions and found nada, zip. Now, all of that should have been comforting, but it just deepened the rabbit hole. Around the same time, helicopters began passing overhead, not often and not directly above the house, but always low, always following the same pattern across the open back base of our hill. Occasionally, a military plane would follow, close enough to rattle the windows. It wasn't as low, but it made that similar loop. Each time they passed, the house went totally mute. No knocking, no footsteps, or any kind of movement. It seemed like whatever was living beneath us picked up on the presence of the aircraft, and it was super weird and started to make my head spin. How big was this? How deep was this? But one day we made a breakthrough, and it didn't happen all at once. My brother mentioned it over lunch. He was quiet for a moment, pushing food around his plate, then said something that made all of us stop what we were doing. "There are doors in the woods," he said. "Behind the house, buried." My mother asked him what he meant by that. He told us last year him and his friend had wandered into the trees behind our property. They found a shallow depression in the land, something that didn't look natural once you noticed it. At the bottom, half hidden by brush and dirt, were two metal doors set into the ground, flat, heavy, and sealed shut. They didn't open them. They didn't even try. Something about them had felt dangerous to them. They obviously weren't meant to be found. He went on saying that they continued to look around the area and found a second door further along the hill. This one had a single hatch door that was round and sunk into the earth itself. At the time, he assumed they were some kind of storm shelter, old utility access, something totally routine, you know? He hadn't really thought about them again until the knocking started to really haunt us, and then the chopper patrols came in almost that exact same area. It then occurred to him that it could be a military installation out there or something. That afternoon, we ended up pulling up some satellite images, zoomed out and zoomed in, and got our own orientation. Just a few adjustments and boom, there they were. Two rectangular shapes just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by foliage, symmetrical, unmistakably man-made, positioned not far from where the man had been standing that morning, facing our house. And the round one was a little harder to find, but it appeared to be there as well. There was no roads that led to them, no structures nearby, nothing that explained why they were there or what connected them to us. But from Mom's best guess, they were maybe 1,200 feet away from where we stood now. The house now felt like a ticking time bomb. Mom was furious that my brother hadn't said anything sooner, and the knocking did not stop. It actually began to sound closer, as if whatever had stayed deep beneath us had begun to move upward, testing the space. Sometimes the taps would come directly beneath the center of the house. Other times they followed the slope of the land like something traveling underground. The nights when helicopters passed overhead, the knocking would go away. The nights when the skies were clear, it would return, soft and firm, like somebody checking a piece of fruit. My mother actually started keeping notes, times, dates, sounds, and patterns, and my father refused to look at them, to acknowledge it all. He told us our imagination was getting away from us, said there were reasonable explanations for everything, old infrastructure, geological noises, coincidences. Every now and again, he would hear something and I could see that flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was also the one that insisted on dragging the police out here not once but twice. He knew what he heard, it's just that the police didn't search to uncover anything. And for a simple man like my father, that was enough. That was all the answers that he needed. But even he began locking the doors, all hours of the day. And we never went to the doors inside the woods. It honestly felt like crossing a line that we couldn't uncross. It felt unholy. Perhaps if we were out there, they'd be open and something would drag us underneath the surface, show us exactly how it made all those noises. And the presence continued to linger. Sometimes late at night, I'd just lie there awake and listen, not to the house, but to the land beneath it. I began to imagine the space under us not as empty earth, but as something hollowed out. Long corridors, reinforced walls, maybe even a city. Dwarves tinkering around, mining iron and tin from the rich veins, and forged empires inside the darkness. I had a lot of wild dreams like this for all of my middle school years. And once, just before falling asleep, I too heard the cough directly below my room. There was no muffle or distance with it. Right there beneath me, inches. I didn't move, I could hardly breathe. No more coughing or sounds after, and I felt completely crazy. As the years passed, the disturbances would fade, slowly. The helicopters stopped coming almost completely. The knocking softened and became true background noise. We only heard it every now and again, and Dad thinks it was just rocks shifting under the house. And to my brother and I, though, this place has never felt the same. The doors are still out there in the woods. We've checked. They haven't moved. They haven't rusted. They appear maintained. No overgrowth, no layers of dirt or dust along the seams. Whatever is beneath our house apparently comes and goes, or at least receives company of some kind. Whatever the case, though, it's become a lot more quiet now. Some nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it was a Morse code of some kind, maybe just to scare us, or to warn us, or maybe someone was asking for help down there. Who knows? This happened in June near Asheville, North Carolina, along the Appalachian Trail. My boyfriend, our dog, and I had been kayaking all day and set up a camp near the river where the trail runs almost right alongside the water. Our campsite was maybe 10 feet off the AT civilization, if you can call it that. It was only about a 5-minute walk down the trail, a road crossing, a dumpster, a small boat ramp, close enough to feel safe, but far enough to still feel alone. It had been a long, stressful day on the river. Strong current, one rough spill, a near flip, so by late afternoon we were just trying to decompress. We'd run low on weed, so we ate some edibles and just stretched out. My boyfriend was half asleep in his hammock near the water. I was lying on the towel by the tent. The dog was wandering between us. And that's when this man just walked straight into our camp. He came up the trail wearing a full backpacking rig. Big pack, sweat-darkened shirt, trekking poles, legit through hiker gear, you know? And then started talking before he'd even reached us. "Hey, y'all mind taking my trash?" It took me a second to process, then I realized Okay, trail etiquette. Some hikers will hand off their trash if they're passing a place with disposal. I guess that is normal. But we were 5 minutes from a dumpster. I told him that. There's a bin right down the trail. You can just toss it there. Instead, he pulls this large bag of weed out from his pack. You can have some of this if you take it. That threw me off. Still, I guess free weed is free weed, right? I said sure. He dropped a small handful of nugs into my palm and stuffed his trash into our bag. I asked the usual questions. You through hiking? How long you been out? He said he'd been on the trail for a couple of months now. Then he asked if he could hang out and have a beer. And in hindsight, that was the first mistake. At the time, he just seemed like a lonely guy who hadn't talked to anybody in a while. And honestly, I thought he might have assumed that I was alone, but my boyfriend was still in the hammock, half hidden. When my boyfriend eventually lifted his head, the guy was visibly startled, and that confirmed it. He hadn't realized that I wasn't by myself. He kept saying things like, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people," which is exactly what creepy people say. Still, I guess the conversation was normal enough. Trail stories, blisters, rain in Virginia, the usual. We decided to smoke using a gravity setup in the river and offered him some since he'd given us the weed. He took a hit, coughed hard, almost like he'd never smoked or something. And that's when everything kind of shifted. He started talking and talking and talking. But it was barely audible, just this low muttering stream of words aimed at the river itself. We couldn't make out all the sentences, just kind of fragments of it. He'd stare at the water while speaking, then suddenly look at us like we were supposed to respond. We'd nod back and laugh awkwardly. Yeah, man, totally. But we had no idea what he was saying. Time stretched, he drank 3 beers, smoked 2 cigarettes, and he didn't leave. At one point, when we stopped trying to engage, he pulls out his phone and starts talking to Siri, then yelling at Siri, calling it a bitch, demanding answers. The river was loud but steady. The trees were still, no wind. Then, out of nowhere, he turns toward us and asks, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer to you?" When he said it, it wasn't playful, nor like a joke. It was direct, curious, even serious. My boyfriend and I locked eyes instantly. That silent exchange, like, we're both hearing this, right? We forced out nervous laughter. 1. Definitely a 1. He stared at us for a beat too long, then nodded slowly, a little smile teasing at his lips. After that, we shut it down. We climbed into the hammock together, started talking to each other instead of him. Close circle, body language clear. He said he was going to smoke 1 more cigarette and head out, and I'm telling you now, that was the longest cigarette I've ever seen anybody smoke. I watched it burn down millimeter by millimeter as dusk crept in. He took these long drags, stared at the river, looked over at us occasionally, zero smile or emotion on his face. Finally, he stood up, shouldered his back, walked back up the trail the way he came. But it was nearly dark, which meant he couldn't be going far. The Appalachian Trail is different at night. Sound carries strangely, footsteps are amplified. You hear movement long before you actually see it. That night, we were certain he would come back. Every snapping twig would jolt us upright. Multiple people walked past us on the trail after dark, headlamps bobbing. But they were hikers that we'd seen earlier that day. A strange couple who thought they might live on the trail, but not him. Still, we planned for disaster. If he came back, we'd grab the dog and run straight into the river, let the current take us downstream to the boat ramp. Which sounds insane, I know, especially when we whispered it, but at least it was a plan. We didn't sleep much, which was fine because he never returned, and we didn't see him again. Maybe he was just this socially awkward guy. Maybe he'd been alone in the woods for far too long, forgot how to normally interact. Maybe he just got a little too high. Or maybe he approached what he thought was a lone woman at a riverside camp. Maybe he tested the air, stayed longer than necessary, asked a question that he'd been thinking about for quite a while now. The memory doesn't scare me. It's what could have happened out there in the middle of nowhere, smothered in darkness.
This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I remember that I was taking a gym class. It was a basic gym class where you would do a little bit of everything. One day in particular, we were doing some kind of cardio workout, At my high school, when I went there, they had a few different rooms that gym classes would use. There was the main basketball gyms, which were kind of in the center of the school towards the front. The weight room and then another exercise room were on one side of that by the locker rooms. Then, on the opposite side, there was this long hallway, and down there was this room called the cardio room. I think it was actually the old weight room back in the day, and then they moved the weight room to a larger and nicer space, and they changed this room to cardio. It had mostly machines like treadmills and bikes, but there were some weight machines as well, and they also had some ellipticals and other stuff. There were a few dumbbells and things like that, but most of the equipment in that room looked really old. So for some reason we were doing a kind of workout on the treadmills and bikes in that room, as well as jump ropes. I don't remember the whole workout, but basically we would all go at our own pace. When we had completed the workout, we would go into the main gym and play basketball, which was basically an open gym. The teacher went into the gym to oversee it. So we all did the workout in the cardio room. I remember that I was on the bike for a while taking my time. I wasn't in a real hurry to finish, even though I did enjoy basketball, but I worked out on my own as well as this class, so in gym class I would kind of just take it easy and be lazy, to be honest. None of the stuff we did was really that hard. About probably half the class finished before me. After the bike we had to do some jump rope work out there, and then when I was finally done with that, there was maybe 20 minutes left of class. So I left the cardio room to go to the gym, and when I did, all I would have to do was walk a ways down the hallway and then cross it. I finished the cardio workout and didn't really get done at the same time as anybody else. So I left the cardio room by myself and stepped out into the hallway. This hallway was a quiet one, and it was on the end of the old wing of the school, and not too many rooms were in use over there anymore. As I started walking down the hallway though, I saw something almost right away. There was a man, a grown man, trying to enter the doors to the gym, the same doors that I was planning to go through. The guy was tugging on the doors and they appeared to be locked. I had never seen this guy before and did not know who he was. He did not seem like a teacher at all, and the way that he was aggressively trying to open the doors gave me a bad feeling. So I turned and went the other way. There were other doors entering the same gym if you went around the corner, so I decided that's what I would do. The man did not seem to notice me at all, but I never really had to get that close to him. So I walked around the corner to the north end of the gym. When I got there, those doors were also locked. I was confused. I knocked on them once, but nobody answered right away. I didn't know what was going on, but it was possible that they had put the dividers up in the gym and nobody was in that area. So I decided to go back around to the cardio room where the rest of my class was. I made the walk past the north end of the gym and around to the old hallway. When I made it back into that hallway, I no longer saw the man at all. However, when I walked over to the cardio room, I tried the doors there and they were also locked. I should have stayed there and kept knocking, but I was so confused that I started to look around the hallway. That's when I heard footsteps from farther down, and I had a bad feeling. So I quickly turned and just walked the other way out of instinct, going back to the north end of the school. As I was walking, I heard something come over the school intercom. I couldn't hear it that clearly, because you know how intercom systems are not always that clear, but I did hear the word lockdown. I was now realizing that the school must be in a lockdown, and that's why all the doors were locked. And somehow, some way, I had been trapped out in the hallways. I also realized that the man who I saw in the hallways trying to get in the gym was quite possibly part of this. So I walked faster now and went around the corner. I tried to enter the gym again, but it was still locked and nobody was answering the door. Then I heard footsteps behind me a ways back, so I quickly left that area. I went down a random hallway, and at that point I was getting nervous. I started quickly walking through more random hallways to try to get as far away from that guy as I could. After walking for a while and not hearing anything, I found a random classroom and I stopped and knocked on the door. I thought maybe they would let me in. However, once again, nobody was answering. As I was there knocking, I started to hear footsteps in one of the nearby hallways approaching me. Was the man coming after me? I knew that I needed to get out of there, and knocking on the door was only giving away my location, so I walked away from there quickly. I started going down more and more random hallways. Then I had the idea to leave the school entirely, so I headed for one of the back exits, which happened to be the closest one to me. However, when I got there, I tried opening the doors, but they were like locked from the inside. I didn't know what to do, so I turned around and kept going down hallways. The school was literally dead silent except me and this other guy. Every so often I would hear his footsteps in a nearby hallway. I was desperately trying to get away from him. When I was doing so, I almost went into a bathroom to hide, but I thought better of it. I figured it was too risky. If the man got in there, I would be cornered. so I kept walking. I don't know if I've ever been more nervous than that. I felt like I had to keep moving and always be alert to where the man was, although I couldn't see him, only hear his footsteps in the distance. After a long time of walking, I thought that I lost him. I stopped hearing anything and I slowed down, but then I heard him again. So I walked faster and headed back to the front of the school. Then when I got towards the front doors, finally I saw something. There were a few police officers entering the school. When I saw them, I ran to them and finally was safe. They led me out of the school and I waited out front with about 10 police cars. I didn't know what was going on, but like 30 minutes later the cops told me that they caught the guy and things were safe. The lockdown ended and school resumed. The man thankfully hadn't harmed anyone, but he had gotten into the school and I guess he chased after several kids. I was mad about all the doors being locked, but I guess it was just bad timing. When I knocked on the doors, they probably thought that I was possibly the man. Either way, I'm glad that I got away from him, but I think it's really creepy how he was seemingly going after me. I used to be a substitute teacher part-time years ago. I did it for a few years and it was cool, but I moved on to a career where I don't have time to do that anymore. But in my time subbing, there was really one moment that I still think about sometimes as being scary. So I had to sub at a school that I had never been to before. I think it was my second year that I worked as a substitute teacher. So I arrived at the school and I didn't know my way around very well, but I was able to find the classroom all right. I was substitute teaching 3 classes that day, all in the same classroom. It was a pretty average-looking high school classroom for the most part. Somewhat old, but there was a teacher's desk at the front with a large whiteboard. A bunch of desks were scattered around the room, and some storage was at the back, with posters scattered around on the wall. So for the first couple of classes, things went by pretty smooth. Like normal, I didn't really have to do any actual teaching. It was more just me giving the students instructions of what they had to do, and they're just sitting there and not doing much. After the first 2 classes of the day, there was a break in the action, and I had an off period. That meant there was no class in my room, so I was just sitting by myself in it for the hour. During this time, I got up to use the restroom. Now, when I did this, I couldn't find the bathroom at first. The school was kind of hard to navigate around in, as it was pretty old. I walked down a couple of hallways before I finally found a restroom. As I was leaving the bathroom when I was done, I heard an announcement that the school was going into a lockdown. This was concerning to me, but I just figured that I would get back to my room and things would be fine. I had no clue what the lockdown was for, because now that I was back out in the hallways, they seemed completely empty and quiet. I wandered around to get back to my classroom and almost got lost, but thankfully made it. When I got back in the room, I closed the door, locked it, and then turned off the lights. Then I just sat at the main desk and went on my laptop. I was just waiting for the lockdown to hopefully be over soon, and I hoped that it was nothing serious. I tried to do some internet searches to find any information, but could not. And I didn't get any calls on the classroom phone either. So I sat there for a while in silence, curious as to what was going on. This went on for probably half an hour. Then there was a knock on my classroom door, which startled me. I got up and carefully walked over to the door. I saw a police officer standing on the other side. When I saw that, I opened up the door, curious as to what was happening. Immediately, he asked me to come out of the room. Then he told me that they had reason to believe that a suspect they were looking for was in my classroom. There were more police out in the hallway, and they made me leave the area. Later on, everything was cleared, and I was told that they caught the suspect. Then I went back to the classroom and finished my substitute teaching for the day. I found out that there had been a man who had broke into the school, and he was walking down the hallways, which caused the lockdown. I didn't find out why he did this or much else, but apparently when the lockdown was announced, the police got called and stuff, but they didn't know where the man had gone. Well, when I was gone to the bathroom, he walked right into my room because it was empty and I didn't lock the door. When I got back to my room, he was hiding in one of the back storage closets at the back end of the room. I hadn't noticed at all. The school staff and police saw security camera footage in the hallway of him entering the room, so that's how they knew that he was there. I had no idea. I can't believe that I was in a room with that guy for such a long time. The police were able to enter the rooms and eventually get him to come out of there. That was by far the craziest thing that ever happened when I was a substitute teacher. I was a student in high school a long time ago, but I still remember one particularly scary moment that happened, and I remember it very well, like it just happened yesterday. So it was a pretty normal school day. I was a junior at the time and had got to school and then went to my classes. This was the third hour class of the day, which was history, I recall. The classroom was on the second floor of the school, and personally I liked it because we would watch a lot of videos there. The classroom also had these carpet floors, which I liked. But anyways, I remember that during class, the teacher said that there was a lockdown. Class was probably about halfway through at that point, and I remember wondering what the lockdown was about. It seemed to come out of nowhere. I don't recall hearing any announcement on the intercom or anything of that nature. So I remember that the teacher said that we all had to sit at the back of the class. The desks that we had could easily be moved, so everybody just ended up moving their desks towards the back, far away from the door. I sat on the side of the room kind of towards the back near the door, so I moved my desk back a little ways. So we all moved to the back end of the room, and then the teacher locked the door and turned off the lights. Most of us were obviously wondering what the lockdown was for, and we asked the teacher, but he said that he didn't know. So as we were sitting there for a while, some of us kids started to get bored, but I think we were also a little bit nervous as well. Then, suddenly, everything was interrupted by very loud bangs coming from the classroom door. We all looked to the door at once. The small window there was covered though. You could sort of see a shadow of somebody on the other side, but not very well at all. Not enough to tell any details about them, like if it was a man, a woman, or if they were large or small. Just enough to really tell that somebody was there on the other side. And these bangs on the door, they were not just a knock or anything like that. It was like this person was trying to break down the door or something. There were about 4 or 5 of these really loud bangs. I know that when I heard it, I was terrified. After the loud noises though, they stopped and the shadow left the doorway. Everybody in the classroom was dead silent. That silence continued for about 30 seconds, but it was only broken by more very loud bangs, this time coming from the wall on the other side of the classroom. It was like whoever was in the hallway simply moved locations. They banged there a few times and then it went silent again. The class got eerily silent with nobody talking at all. Not even the teacher. Things were quiet for several minutes then. Finally, some people started quietly talking again, but it wasn't normal conversation. It was just talk trying to figure out what was possibly going on. Then, like 5 minutes after that, the loud bangs came back to the door, as whoever was doing it was back. They went on longer this time. There was like 10 of these very loud bangs on the door. I was scared that the door was going to break, but it held up well. Then the noises stopped, and things went dead silent again after that. We were all terrified. For the next 20 or 30 minutes, I'm telling you, nobody said a word. You could hear a pin drop in that classroom. Then, all of a sudden, the phone rang in the classroom. The teacher answered it and didn't stay on the line for very long before hanging up. He then announced to us that the lockdown was over and assured us all that we were safe. I think everybody breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Some of the students asked what happened at that point, but the teacher said he didn't know and they didn't tell him. We were all very curious. For the rest of the school day, things resumed to normal. But everyone was a little shook up from the craziness. However, I asked a bunch of people, and nobody knew what happened. Over the next few days and weeks, there was nothing on the news or in the papers or anything. Nobody ever seemed to find out what the lockdown was about or what happened. I still don't know. Was it some intruder or an angry student or what? I'm not sure, but I know that it was a really scary experience. This happened when I was in high school. I was a 17-year-old girl and in my senior year. I enjoyed high school and had a lot of friends and overall did well in my classes. The school that I attended was very large with over 1,000 students enrolled. During the time, I lived with my parents and siblings in a pretty typical neighborhood and house. That's the background for this, and it all started sometime pretty early on in the school year. I had an Instagram account and my friends and I were pretty active on there and would post pictures and stories sometimes. A lot of people from my school followed me, but there were some other people as well, some people that I didn't even know. I had made my page when I was like in middle school, so I had it for a long time. Every now and then, some creepy guy would message me with either some scam or some creep trying to hit on me. I would just ignore them and sometimes block them. So one day, I remember that this random guy on Instagram started messaging me. I saw that he was following me, but I was not following him. I did not know who he was, but looking at his profile picture, he appeared much older. He said hi to me, but I did not respond. However, I think that a few days after that, he started sending more messages. He asked me where I lived, and asked me if we could hang out, but I still didn't reply. But the man was persistent. He asked if I lived in the city that I lived in, mentioning it. Then once more, he asked if we could hang out or something, and he sent a bunch of question marks. This didn't make me nervous or anything because in my pictures it was not hard to find out where I lived. I literally had my high school tagged in some of my posts and things like that. It was not a really small city, so there's no way that he would find me or anything. But still, it was annoying how he would not leave me alone, so I blocked him. After that, I didn't hear from him for a little while, but unfortunately it was only a few days later that I saw him again on Instagram. It was now a different account that he was using. I wouldn't have been able to tell that it was him at first, but when he sent me a message, it gave him away. He said something like, "Why did you block me? I want to see you. Can I come over?" This time, I finally responded. I said in all caps, "Leave me alone, you creep. I don't want anything to do with you." Then I blocked him again. I figured that that should send the message that I wasn't interested and it would make it loud and clear. And after that, I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. The following day, I went to school like normal. I was sitting in one of my first classes of the day when I saw that I got another Instagram message. I was instantly suspicious that it was the same guy again, just making another account, because nobody else was really messaging me that much at the time. It was once again another new profile. The message said, "I want to see you now. Leave your class." I said, "Make all the accounts you want. I'm just going to keep blocking you." But the guy responded again saying, "I am here to see you." Now, when he said that, I didn't know what he meant. I didn't respond, but instead just blocked him. Probably 5 minutes later, the school went into a lockdown. There was an announcement, and in my class, the teacher turned off the lights and locked the doors. Most of us students were confused. At first, I didn't connect the dots, but pretty quickly after, I did. I wondered if the man actually was here to see me. We all sat in the classroom, mostly quiet, for a pretty long time. There was no information given to us about why we were in a lockdown. It lasted for maybe 45 minutes if I had to guess, and then thankfully it was over. At that point, a lot of people were obviously curious. The word quickly spread, and I was able to find out. Sure enough, it was that guy who was harassing me on Instagram. He was easily able to find out where I attended high school because of my Instagram profile. So he shockingly showed up and walked into the school trying to find me. He did not know where my classes were or where my locker was or anything, but the school staff quickly saw that he didn't belong and locked the place down. The man got trespassed and I had to go to the office and then to the police station to file a restraining order. I didn't know that the guy lived in the area at all. And as it turns out, he didn't. He drove over an hour just to see me, which I can't believe. I still am in shock that it happened, but thankfully I haven't seen him or heard from him since then. This happened during high school. I was a senior and it was my first hour of the day. For that class, a big part of it was doing these projects. We would basically have like a big project every 2 weeks or something like that. One thing my school had was this hallway at the southeast end of the school where there were all these study rooms. They were small rooms with just like 4 tables, 2 computers, and a few chairs, and that was pretty much it. You could go into these rooms and study pretty much any time, and our teacher would have our groups break out into these study rooms sometimes. My partner for this project was a guy named Brandon who was pretty cool, and we were friends in high school. On this day of class, I think it was a Friday, which was typically an easier and more chill day. It was mostly a work day, and the teacher gave us the option to work on our projects in class or in a study room. I remember that he also said that we could do homework for other classes if we wanted, because the overall project was running a little bit ahead of schedule, and we were doing well. Brandon and I were the only people in the class of like 15 to choose to go to a study room. Everyone else stayed in the classroom to work or hang out there. So we went down the hallways and got to one of the study rooms, and they were all empty, so we took one on the end. We did some work for the project and also just hung out and talked and played on our phones and stuff. At one point though, we heard this noise come over the school intercom system. It wasn't quite the bell sound, and also class was nowhere near being over, so it got our attention. The next thing we heard was an announcement saying that the school was being locked down and to follow procedure. Brandon and I wondered if we should leave the study room and go back to our classroom or just stay there. For some reason, we decided to stay there. We weren't really sure what to do though, so we just turned out the lights. The door had no lock on it, so we couldn't do anything. But I think that Brandon and I were not that nervous about being in a lockdown. We figured that it was probably nothing. Pretty much we quieted down, but we continued to talk and hang out and just wait for the lockdown to be over. We even did some more work on our project. After maybe like 10 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps coming down the hallway. We obviously didn't know who it was, but I kinda hoped and assumed that it was someone who worked at the school. But it was also then that the thought occurred to me that maybe we were in some type of danger. The footsteps got closer and closer, and Brandon and I quietly whispered until whoever was there got real close. Then we shut up and went completely silent. It seemed as though whoever was there was going to go right to our door and open it. But instead, the footsteps walked past and they continued down the hallway. We both felt a little better at that point, maybe a little too good, because Brandon then said that he wanted to see who it was, so he got up and walked over to the door. From the window, he couldn't see that far, so he then opened the door. I also looked out when he did because I was curious too. What we saw was this man who did not work at the school and was wearing a hooded jacket concealing most of his head. He was walking in the opposite direction and much farther down the hallway. He was also definitely not a student. But when we opened the door, he heard it, stopped, and turned around. When he saw us, both of our reactions was just to run. Brandon and I took off down the hallway. It was possibly the fastest that I've ever run in my life. We went down that hallway, turned the corner, and ran down another one. Finally, we arrived back at our classroom, and both of us knocked on the door and yelled for our teacher to open it. Thankfully, within seconds, he did so and let us back in. We got in the classroom and quickly locked the door behind us. The man did not try to get into the classroom or anything, though. I'm not sure where he went. The lockdown lasted for about another hour. Then finally, it was over. The man had been found in the school and was arrested. I never found out what he was doing or how he got in the school, but that was a really crazy experience.